Chapter 208. She made several hand seals one after another, and spiritual aura, which was almost tangible, hit the pill furnace. The spiritual medicines inside the furnace began to change violently. Emotienga closed her eyes and used her divine sense to observe the medicinal liquid inside the furnace. Dozens of materials dissolved and fused. Because of the hand seals, the changes became more and more intense. This was the pill melting process. It would last for a long time, and when the changes stopped, it would be the moment the pills were formed. Therefore, in the next few days, she had to wait like this. From time to time, she would make hand seals to urge the materials to fuse and drain out the impurities. Time passed bit by bit. Elder Qingmiao and Elder Qingxi would take turns every 6 hours. Elder Qingyi had been guarding the door. Xia Qing was recording Emotienga's pill concocting steps and learning her hand seals, while Wei Haolan was assisting her. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. The materials inside the furnace were finally fused together smoothly. Emotienga wiped the sweat on her forehead and heaved a sigh of relief. However, she soon regained her full concentration and made several hand seals to form the pills. This was the last day. Whether she would succeed or fail would depend on this moment. The medicinal liquid inside the furnace began to slowly gather and solidify. "Who are you?" Elder Qingyi's shout was accompanied by a strange wave of energy fluctuations. The expressions of the 5 people inside the concocting room changed. This was the crucial moment of pill concocting. What happened? When that strange fluctuation became clearer and clearer, Emotienga was greatly shocked. She could already feel it. It was Ren Yufeng. When she arrived at Linhai, she didn't find any trace of Ren Yufeng. Nothing happened in the past 3 months, so Emotienga almost thought he was washed away by the waves. But now, Ren Yufeng appeared at this crucial moment. Nevertheless, she quickly calmed down. With 3 core formation cultivators here, Ren Yufeng wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. Although Elder Qingxi's spiritual aura was almost exhausted because she used her Dantian real fire, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao were still in good condition. With 2 core formation elders here, Ren Yufeng's cultivation level was improper, so he definitely couldn't win. Elder Qingmiao, who was meditating, frowned and said seriously, "I'll go take a look. You two stay calm." "Yes," Wei Haolan and Xia Qing answered. The 2 of them consciously ran to the door just in case. Emotienga also calmed down and continued concocting. Miserable cries rang out from outside, followed by the sounds of fighting. "Are you a devil path cultivator?" Elder Qingyi shouted. Originally, she was just guessing, but upon hearing this voice, Emotienga was now certain that it was indeed Ren Yufeng. "What demonic cultivator? I'm the divine dragon's son." Ren Yufeng's tone was arrogant and conceited. "Son of the divine dragon?" Elder Qingyi's voice was filled with doubt. "Senior sister." Elder Qingmiao walked out of the concocting room and said, "What divine dragon's son? In my opinion, he's a cultivator from the devil path. He even injured our disciple, so there's no need to say anything. Just kill him." "Not bad," Elder Qingyi answered. "He's covered in devil aura, but he's still not a cultivator from the devil path. He actually injured our group's disciples. There's no need to be polite to him." "You!" Ren Yufeng was furious. "How dare you slander me? I am the son of the divine dragon. I am the son of the divine dragon." The fluctuation of spiritual energy was even more intense. Emotienga knew they must be fighting, so she said to Elder Qingxi, "Senior, let's speed up so we can finish refining faster. Please strengthen your real fire." Elder Qingxi, who also sensed the danger outside, nodded. "All right, I'll have to trouble little friendy." As she said that, she urged her spiritual aura, and the real fire in her Dantian immediately became a bit thicker. Emotienga was also rapidly making hand seals. Although she felt the 2 core formation cultivators could definitely stop Ren Yufeng, she still had to be prepared just in case. Suddenly strengthening the concocting fire would impact the medicinal liquid inside the pill furnace. Emotienga used hand seals to weaken the impact, while speeding up the concoction of the medicinal pills. "Sect headway, what's the situation outside?" Emotienga had no time to spread her divine sense while paying attention to the concoction of the pill furnace, so she had to ask Wei Haolan. Wei Haolan, who was standing at the door, stuck her head out to take a look. This devil cultivator is very strong in fights of magical power. But rest assured, fellow Taoist Yi, the two elders can handle him. That's good. Mo Tiange felt a bit relieved. She also felt Ren Yufeng couldn't defeat the two elders, but she kept feeling the space between her eyebrows twitching. It wasn't a good sign. Yi Haolan said. Mo Tiange tilted her head. What's wrong? It's Senior Marshal Brother Shangguan, Yi Haolan said. Senior Marshal Brother Shangguan has reached the peak stage of the foundation building realm. I hope he can help the two elders. Mo Tiange wrinkled her brows when she heard what he said. Her intuition told her something was wrong. Master, Marshal Uncle Qingmiao, I've come to help you. This was fellow Taoist Shangguan's voice. Yunhao, why did you come here instead of at the Tao Achieving Pagoda? Elder Qingyi's voice sounded a bit strict. Right, why did he happen to come here? Shangguan Yunhao answered. I just sensed a strange aura in the Tao Achieving Pagoda, so I followed it here. In front of a formidable enemy, Elder Qingyi couldn't blame him. She just said, then quickly come here. This devil cultivator's divine power is extraordinary, be careful. Although the peak stage of the foundation building realm was only a step away from the core formation realm, it was actually a lot weaker. Elder Qingyi really doted on this disciple. She was worried about him the moment he arrived, afraid he would get hurt. Senior Marshal Sister Sect Head, Xia Qing asked in a low voice. Where did this devil cultivator come from? Is there a flaw in our Bishuan court's great sect protecting formation? Wei Haolan wrinkled her brows. Correct. According to reason, we should have known the moment this devil cultivator entered our great sect protecting formation. How could he suddenly appear in the concocting room? Mo Tiange once heard Yi Lu and Yi Qiu say that the west side of Linhai was a branch of Demonic Mountain. Demonic Mountain not only had a towering main peak, but it also had many complicated branches. Those devil cultivators of the Path of Devil lived in these mountain ranges. The reason why Linhai cultivators didn't dare to go to Kunwu through Demonic Mountain was not only because they were afraid of running into high-level devil cultivators, but also because the terrain of these mountain ranges was peculiar. They basically couldn't jump over them. All these years, no devil cultivators had ever reached Linhai for the same reason. Sect Headway, Mo Tiange said. This person is the enemy I told you about. He has a strange temperament and willfully kills innocent people. You must be careful. Since Ren Yufeng had already degenerated into a devil cultivator, his temperament must have also changed. During that year, Mo Tiange saw that he was irritable and capricious, so she knew he'd become a genuine devil cultivator. Wei Haolan's and Xia Qing's expressions changed at the same time. Although they knew about this matter, in the past few months, they didn't see any traces of devil cultivators, so they didn't take it seriously. They never expected that they'd actually come knocking on their door. A scream suddenly came from outside. Judging from the voice, it was Elder Qingyi. Wei Haolan was shocked. She looked outside and her expression changed. Senior Marshal Brother Shangguan. She didn't need to say anything, because Elder Qingmiao's angry voice came from outside. Shangguan Yunhao, what are you doing? What am I doing? Shangguan Yunhao's voice also became gloomy. Of course I'm killing you. Everyone inside the concocting room was stunned. Elder Qingxi was even more shocked. Her hands trembled, and she coughed up a mouthful of blood. Elder Qingxi, Wei Haolan and Xia Qing's expressions changed as they rushed over. Mo Tiange couldn't help but sigh when she heard a muffled sound from inside the furnace. At the last moment, the concoction of the clear sky pill failed. But now wasn't the time to worry about this. She took out a healing medicinal pill from inside her robe and gave it to Wei Haolan. Quickly give this to Senior Qingxi. Also take a restorative panacea. Since Elder Qingyi was plotted against, she could only try her best to preserve Elder Qingxi's strength. Shangguan Yunhao. Although Elder Qingyi's voice was a bit weak, it was very fierce. The three of us have always treated you well. Why are you biting the hand that feeds you? Treated me well? Shangguan Yunhao's voice was polite and restrained before, but this time, it was full of ridicule. If you really treated me well, then why haven't I formed my gold core at 170 years old? It's not like you don't know about the lack of resources in Linhai, Elder Qingmiao said coldly. But ever since we accepted you as our disciple, you've always been the first to get medicinal pills. You've just built your foundation, but we already let you enter the Tao Achieving Pagoda. When you reached the peak stage of the foundation building realm, we always sent disciples to Kunwu to look for dustless pills. Bishuang Court is only a small cultivation group, but we've always treated you 10 times better than other disciples. Is there anything you're dissatisfied with? Dissatisfied? Of course I'm dissatisfied. Shangguan Yunhao let out a humph. He obviously didn't agree with Elder Qingmiao's statement. Correct. As soon as I entered the sect, you gave me pointers. As soon as I reached the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, you gave me foundation building pills. However, you treated me so well only because I was the disciple with the best aptitude Bishuan Court accepted in the past several hundred years. What happened after that? After I reached the peak stage of the foundation building realm, you delayed giving me dustless pills and didn't let me form my gold core. Just like that, you trapped me in the peak stage of the foundation building realm for 50 years. 50 years. 50 years ago, I asked you to let me go to Kunwu, so I could look for dustless pills or some fated chances on my own. But what did you do? You'd rather send disciples with no future to Kunwu than let me go out. Weren't you just afraid I wouldn't come back after I went to Kunwu? Because you were afraid you couldn't control me. You made me unable to form my gold core for 50 years. Upon hearing what he said, Wei Haolan's expression changed. She stood up and walked out of the concocting room. Shangguan Yunhao, check your conscience. The elders didn't let you go out because they were worried about your safety. We have so many martial sisters and junior sisters who always run around for your dustless pills. From the moment you entered the sect, did we ever ask you to do anything? No, not only did we not, but we also provided you with everything you needed for your cultivation. It's fine if you don't feel grateful, but you actually made a false accusation. Because of me. Shangguan Yunhao sneered. Wei Haolan, don't you feel guilty saying this? 40 years ago, the former sect head abdicated, and I wanted to be the sect head. With my qualifications and cultivation level, why did the position of sect head fall into your hands in the end? Moreover, you didn't even allow me to take a step out of the group. You imprisoned me in disguise. Shangguan Yunhao. Wei Haolan was furious. Our Bishuang Court is a cultivation group for female cultivators. Every generation of sect heads has been a female cultivator. Is letting you be the sect head going to provoke others? Yes, that's it. Shangguan Yunhao said sarcastically. Just because I'm a male cultivator, you're always on guard against me. Don't think I don't know. In fact, you already got your hands on dustless pills a few years ago. You just didn't let me make a realm breakthrough smoothly. On guard against you? Elder Qingyi finally spoke. She coughed then continued to say. Correct, I'm on guard against you. Elder Qingyi? Wei Haolan was bewildered. When you fought against Haolan for the position of sect head, I could already see your intentions weren't right. Therefore, at that time, I didn't let you go out and didn't immediately give you dustless pills. But why do you think I did that? If you didn't grind away your greed and didn't cultivate your mental state, you'd fall because of your inner demon if you wanted to form your gold core. Chapter 209. Mo Tiange walked over softly and looked outside through the crack in the door. There was blood on Elder Qingyi's chest, but she was still standing, and Elder Qingmiao was on guard beside her. Shangguan Yunhao, who was standing not too far away, looked resentful. Ren Yufeng, on the other hand, was watching their quarrel with interest as if it had nothing to do with him. Don't think I'll believe you. Shangguan Yunhao's face twisted. My heart is evil? You're clearly biased. Yes, we're biased. Elder Qingmiao stared at him with a sharp gaze. We're really blind to be biased towards a heartless and unscrupulous thing like you. Linhai is so short of resources, but we gave you a share of everything first. We didn't ask you to do anything, and only told you to focus on cultivating. But in the end we raised an ingrate. The three elders watched Shangguan Yunhao grow up. Now that Elder Qingmiao's gaze was sharp, his momentum weakened, and his eyes also started to shrink. Ren Yufeng chuckled softly. His devilish eyes swept over the female cultivators in front of him. If that's the case, why didn't they let you go to Kunwu? Upon hearing that, Shangguan Yunhao stuck out his chest again. Right. You obviously had no choice but to cultivate me for the sake of the group's future. You were afraid I wouldn't go back to Linhai after going to Kunwu. So you wanted me to be trapped in Linhai for the rest of my life. Nevertheless, Mo Tiange knew this reason. When she went to the Tao Achieving Pagoda to see the three elders a few days ago, she already heard from them that Bishuan court was short of talents. So they didn't dare to let their disciples with high aptitudes go out to gain experience. This wasn't the reason Shangguan Yunhao mentioned at all. This Shangguan Yunhao's heart was really evil. Did he think he could be flattered everywhere, just because he had mutated spiritual roots? In Kunwu, every cultivation group indeed wanted to accept mutated spiritual roots. But if he thought he had mutated spiritual roots and relied on the group for everything, he'd only be looked down upon by others. Even if Bishuan court was short of resources, with the strength of a group, how bad could he be if he fully supported his cultivation? This was probably the best a small or medium-sized cultivation group in Kunwu could do. However, if it was a big cultivation group, even if they accepted disciples with mutated spiritual roots, they definitely wouldn't treat him as leniently as Bishuan court did. If his cultivation level couldn't meet the cultivation group's requirements, the number of spirit stones and medicinal pills he received would be reduced. If he failed to live up to expectations, no one could save him. That was why it was said that superior aptitude was a gift from the heavens. However, in the end, one still had to rely on one's own hard work. Those who relied on their outstanding aptitude to feel that everything was given to them by others would never be able to achieve the immortal Tao. Qingmiao, don't talk to him anymore. Elder Qingyi snorted in a low voice. This kind of heartless and unscrupulous thing always blames other people's fault if he can't obtain anything. He never thought that from the moment he entered the sect, everything he has today was given by us. Not bad. Elder Qingmiao's expression also became indifferent. She stared at Shangguan Yunhao with an indifferent gaze. Obviously, she didn't have the slightest bit of hope. Us three martial sisters are really failures. After more than 100 years, we only managed to teach this kind of thing. The conversation between the two elders made Shangguan Yunhao seethe with anger. Not only did you not repent, you even said that there were some people in this world who held grudges, but didn't remember kindness. They never thought about how much others had given them. Instead, they always thought about how much others could still give them. If they didn't give them everything they could, they would feel that others had let them down. Therefore, even if they wanted to show kindness, they still had to see who the person was. If some people treated them well, not only would they not feel grateful, but they would also think they were stupid. They would be delusional enough to want more from you, otherwise, they would be letting them down. 1 liter of rice was a favor, but 1 bucket of rice was a grudge. This saying wasn't unreasonable. Shangguan Yunhao, Wei Haolan said coldly. Did you collude with this devil cultivator? Shangguan Yunhao's gaze was gloomy and cold. He didn't get the sect head's position, so he harbored intense hatred towards Wei Haolan. Yes, he promised to take me away from Linhai. I've long had enough. These days, some of our sect's disciples went missing from time to time. Was it him or you? So what if I did it? Shangguan Yunhao didn't feel guilty at all. It's not a pity for those idiots to die. It's better to give them to senior run for cultivation. It can also be considered recycling waste. Then there's nothing else to say. Wei Haolan waved her hand, summoning a bronze mirror. Elder Qingyi was ambushed because she wasn't on guard against you. Now I'll deal with you. I want to see how strong you, the #1 foundation building disciple of Bishuan court, are. Shangguan Yunhao's expression changed. You overestimate yourself. Wei Haolan, you stole my sect head's position, so today, I'll let you see my strength. As he said that, he also summoned his magic tool. Mo Tiange had never seen Wei Haolan fight, but now that she saw it, she actually wasn't weak at all. Elder Qingyi's gaze was cold as she watched the two of them fighting. This traitor thinks he's amazing. It's good to let Haolan teach him a lesson. We used to protect him, because we didn't want him to suffer any setbacks. Now it seems we were too lenient. Elder Qingmiao lowered her gaze and sighed. She then asked worriedly, Senior Marshal Sister. Are your injuries all right? They're fine. I won't die. Elder Qingyi lowered her hand that was covering her chest. Let's deal with the enemy first. All right. The two martial sisters shifted their gazes towards Ren Yufeng. Both of them summoned their magic weapons. Mo Tiange could see that although Wei Haolan's cultivation level wasn't as high as Shangguan Yunhao's, her fighting ability was very strong. She probably wouldn't lose to him. As for Elder Qingyi, she was a middle-stage core formation cultivator after all. Even if she was ambushed, how could a late-stage foundation-building cultivator possibly injure her? Therefore, her injuries weren't serious. Now that the two elders joined hands, Mo Tiange reckoned she was still a bit stronger than Ren Yufeng. However, when she examined Ren Yufeng carefully, she discovered that the black aura on his body had become even denser. She then recalled what Shangguan Yunhao said about the missing Bishuan court disciples. This Ren Yufeng had indeed embarked on the path of devil cultivators. He actually used human corpses to cultivate. Ren Yufeng was currently confronting Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao. All of a sudden, he cast a glance at the concocting room and said gloomily, Yi Xiaotian, Junior Marshal Sister Yi. We haven't seen each other for several months. Why are you hiding? Since Ren Yufeng and Shangguan Yunhao were colluding, Mo Tiange didn't think she could hide her whereabouts from him. Although she had the temperament to put her own safety before things went awry, she couldn't learn to push the blame away and disregard other people's lives. Therefore, she boldly pushed open the door of the concocting room and walked out. Ren Yufeng, I'm right here. Do you have any advice for me? When Ren Yufeng called her junior martial sister, bewilderment flitted across Elder Qingyi's and Elder Qingmiao's faces. However, when they saw that Mo Tiange was full of vigilance towards Ren Yufeng, their expressions finally relaxed. I wouldn't dare to advise you. Ren Yufeng stared at her with a smile on his face. However, his whole body was now covered in devil aura, so his smile looked even more terrifying. I really didn't expect this. I couldn't find you back then, and thought you escaped with Jiang Shuihan and the others. As it turns out, you actually came to the Eastern Sea with me. Could it be that you've been hiding in the underground palace for a whole year? Correct. It wasn't a big deal to say this out loud. Ren Yufeng, I've been hiding in the underground palace for a whole year. But you didn't notice me at all. Junior Marshal Sister Yi deserves to be the brilliant disciple of a nascent Soul Lord Taoist from Xianqing School. Ren Yufeng's expression twisted. He thought he'd obtained power, but in the end, he was fooled by a foundation-building cultivator. The anger in his heart could be imagined. But today, don't even think about escaping. Mo Tiange sneered. I'll return those words to you. You're sinister, cunning, and harboring evil intentions. As an elite disciple of Zhengfa sect, you used your fellow disciple to burn the bridge after crossing the river. You even schemed everywhere and wanted to kill me to silence me. Yi Xiaotian, am not a weak woman who can be bullied and won't fight back. Since you schemed against me, I'll give you a tooth for a tooth. Ha 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 ha. Ren Yufeng threw his head back and laughed. Once he finished laughing, he said with a gloomy expression, What I hate the most is you so-called proud sons of heaven who look down on others, because you think your aptitudes are high. You want to kill me? What a joke. A mere foundation-building cultivator also wants to kill me. Mo Tiange ignored his mockery. She turned towards Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao and said, Seniors, does what sect headway promised me still count? When Wei Haolan asked her to teach Xiaqing pill concocting, one of her conditions was to ensure her safety. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao already knew this devil cultivator was a deranged person. Even if they stayed out of this matter, this devil cultivator and Bishuan court would never forgive each other. Besides, that missing disciple was also because of this devil cultivator, so the hatred between them had long been formed. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao immediately said to Mo Tiange, Rest assured, little friend Yi. Since we promised, we naturally keep our word. As they spoke, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao stepped forward. Humph. Ren Yufeng let out a cold, humph, and cast a glance at Mo Tiange. I'll deal with these two old women first, then I'll deal with you. Arrogant. Elder Qingyi shouted in response to those words. Even though devil cultivators were slightly stronger than righteous path cultivators in fights of magical power, Ren Yufeng was only an early-stage core formation cultivator. Elder Qingyi was in the middle stage of the core formation realm, while Elder Qingmiao was in the early stage of the core formation realm. There was absolutely no reason for them to lose when it was 2 against 1. Whether I'm arrogant or not, I'll show you. With a ferocious expression, Ren Yufeng formed an art with both hands. In an instant, a sphere formed from black devil aura appeared in front of his chest. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao didn't dare to be careless. Each of them released a protective spiritual light and summoned their magic weapons. Elder Qingyi's weapon was a jade bottle with a willow branch stuck in it. She picked up the willow branch and brushed it, spilling several drops of sweet dew. The spiritual aura in front of them flickered, forming a spiritual aura net that blocked in front of Ren Yufeng. At that moment, Ren Yufeng's devil aura ball was already spinning crazily. He let out a cold humph and swept his gaze over everyone in front of him contemptuously. He then pushed the devil aura ball forward. Boom! The spiritual aura net formed by Elder Qingyi's magic weapon blocked the devil aura ball. But an extremely strong spiritual aura fluctuation burst out from it. Ah! 2 screams rang out. They didn't come from Elder Qingyi or Elder Qingmiao, but from Wei Haolan and Shangguan Yunhao, who were fighting on the side. Mo Tiange was smart enough to hide behind the 2 elders, so she wasn't affected by the fight. Haolan! Upon seeing that Wei Haolan was sent flying, Elder Qingmiao swung the golden rope in her hand, bound Wei Haolan and pulled her back. Shangguan Yunhao, on the other hand, didn't have such good luck. He fell heavily on the ground, spitting out a mouthful of blood. He then pointed at Ren Yufeng. Senior. Ren Yufeng looked at him as if he was looking at an ant. His eyes were filled with contempt. Since you're useless, you can go die. Anger emerged on Shangguan Yunhao's face. You didn't keep your promise. Humph. Ren Yufeng cast him a cold glance and only said one word. Naive. Shangguan Yunhao's eyes widened. His face was filled with unwillingness, but in the end, he still breathed his last. Mo Tiange stared at his corpse without the slightest trace of pity. She didn't sympathize with people who couldn't see their own position, and only knew how to endlessly demand things. Chapter 210. Ren Yufeng had long known Shangguan Yunhao would end up like this. What he hated the most was talented cultivation group disciples, but Shangguan Yunhao just happened to have this kind of temperament. How could he possibly sincerely cooperate with Shangguan Yunhao? Not only did he have no self-awareness, but he was also as stupid as a pig. Shangguan Yunhao didn't feel wronged at all for falling into such a situation. However, a trace of sadness flitted across Elder Qingyi's and Elder Qingmiao's faces when they saw his corpse. He was, after all, the disciple they cultivated for more than 100 years. How could they remain indifferent upon seeing him die in someone else's hands? Ren Yufeng stared at the female cultivators in front of him and smiled gloomily. He's dead, so it's your turn now. Elder Qingmiao pushed Wei Haolan to Mo Tiange, then swung the golden rope in her hand and sneered. Who knows whose turn it will be? Then let's try. Ren Yufeng used his devil aura again. Seeing that they were fighting again, Mo Tiange helped Wei Haolan to a corner. Sect Headway, are you alright? Wei Haolan coughed up a mouthful of blood and said with difficulty, Don't talk first. Mo Tiange took out a healing medicinal pill and fed it to her. There are 2 elders here, so you should heal first. Wei Haolan nodded, swallowed the medicinal pill, then sat down cross-legged without saying anything. Mo Tiange looked up and saw Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao fighting with Ren Yufeng. In the current situation, although Ren Yufeng was strong, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao weren't at a disadvantage. Moreover, they had a good tacit understanding with each other, so their chances of winning were relatively high. However, Mo Tiange felt something was wrong. Ren Yufeng was too confident. He might have colluded with Shangguan Yunhao in the beginning, but he obviously didn't take Shangguan Yunhao seriously at all. He probably just wanted to learn about Bishuan Court's situation from Shangguan Yunhao and use him to crack Bishuan Court's restrictions and formations. Then the question was, where did his confidence come from? Mo Tiange couldn't figure it out. Nevertheless, she was never the type to sit and wait for death. After she felt something was wrong, she took out a simple formation and laid a 4 symbols 100 flowers formation around her. After that, she placed several magic weapons and magic tools in the most accessible places. She also held the magic talismans Lord Taoist Jinghe prepared for her in her hands. Soon after, she carefully observed the situation of their fight of magical power. If there was a life-threatening moment, she planned to directly enter the virtual sky world. Although she had a lot of treasures with her, the gap between the core formation realm and the foundation building realm was too big. If Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao couldn't hold on, she would have no choice but to save her own life first. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao cooperated very well. Elder Qingyi's jade bottle focused on defense, while Elder Qingmiao's golden rope focused on offense. One of them attacked while the other defended, and one advanced while the other retreated. Their teamwork was flawless. Ren Yufeng couldn't gain the slightest bit of advantage, so he immediately looked impatient. After fighting for a while, Ren Yufeng finally couldn't endure it anymore. He used a wisp of devil aura to block Elder Qingmiao's attack and said coldly, "These two old women are quite skilled. It seems I'll have to use my trump card." She guessed Ren Yufeng definitely had something to rely on, but she didn't know what kind of cultivation technique he practiced in the end. Just like before, Elder Qingyi sprayed her willow branch with a layer of spiritual fog, which then turned into a protective spiritual light. Ren Yufeng sneered, "A grain of light dares to compete with the sun and the moon? I'll show you what I can do." Right after he finished speaking, he made a series of hand seals with both hands. A wisp of pure devil aura filled his whole body in an instant, moving around his whole body. This devil aura was unusual. Mo Tiange stared at Ren Yufeng and saw that his momentum suddenly changed. It was as if his cultivation level suddenly rose sharply. However, she wasn't a core formation cultivator, so she couldn't see which stage Ren Yufeng's cultivation level had risen to. Qingmiao Black Tortoise Shield. Elder Qingyi reacted very quickly and immediately shouted. Elder Qingmiao immediately took out an extremely small shield-like magic weapon. With a wave of her hand, the shield flew into the air and expanded in an instant. Ren Yufeng stared coldly at the scene in front of him. Overestimating yourself. When Mo Tiange saw his expression, she instinctively took out the white silk handkerchief, which turned into a brick wall in front of her. Ren Yufeng attacked. The devil ball was thrown again, but this time, its momentum was much stronger than before. With a loud boom, the devil aura collided with Elder Qingyi's spiritual fog and Elder Qingmiao's black tortoise shield. Mo Tiange felt dizzy. Her whole body flew backwards and fell against the wall uncontrollably. After a while she struggled to crawl up. There was a deep fear in her eyes. This momentum definitely wasn't that of an early-stage core formation cultivator. Apparently, Ren Yufeng must have cultivated some kind of secret technique in the past few months to have this kind of ability. If she hadn't laid the 4 symbols 100 flowers formation and had the white silk handkerchief in front of her, she definitely wouldn't have just suffered some minor injuries. She'd most likely have lost her life just like that. Ever since she obtained the white silk handkerchief, Mo Tiange had faced 5th-ranked demonic beasts before, but she'd never suffered such heavy injuries after blocking them. Cough. She wasn't the only one who suffered heavy injuries. Behind her, Wei Haolan, who was already heavily injured, now tilted her head and lost consciousness. Mo Tiange turned around and saw that Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao were still standing. However, one of them was still in a state of shock because her magic weapon had been shattered, while the other one was already injured. So she was now vomiting a mouthful of blood, and her complexion was deathly pale. Elder Qingyi stared at Ren Yufeng in front of her. What kind of sorcery is this? Ren Yufeng looked at the scene in front of him with satisfaction, and walked forward step by step. Who told you it was a devil path spell? I'm the son of the divine dragon. This is a divine dragon secret technique. Divine dragon secret technique? Elder Qingmiao regained her senses and glared at him. Your whole body is covered in devil aura, yet you still dare to say you're the son of the divine dragon? Shameless. You. Ren Yufeng raised his hand again, his face full of anger. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao were on guard at the same time. Their defensive magic weapons were shattered, and they weren't rich cultivators, so they could only reluctantly take out defensive talismans. Ren Yufeng didn't use devil aura to attack like before. Instead, he smiled strangely. It'd be a pity if I didn't let you experience it. Experience what? Before Mo Tiange could guess what he meant, Ren Yufeng stretched out his hand and shouted, "Rise!" In an instant, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao turned pale with fright. The remaining devil aura around their bodies suddenly surged as if it was alive. The devil aura slowly swam towards them, and twined around their bodies. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao were astonished. They took a step back, but the devil aura took a step forward. They wanted to use their spiritual aura to force the devil aura away, but the devil aura easily penetrated their defenses. Senior Martial Sister. Elder Qingmiao was a bit flustered. Although Elder Qingyi was a bit calmer, her injuries were much more serious, so she couldn't do what she wanted. The devil aura was getting closer and closer, almost invading their bodies. They could already feel the strangeness of this devil aura. It was gloomy, cold, lifeless, and it made their blood run cold. Senior Martial Sister, what's this? Elder Qingyi's complexion was pale, but her eyes were filled with shock. This is dead aura, dead aura. I know. Dead aura? Mo Tiange was stunned. There was also some black aura around her body, and now, she was also moving towards her. Yes, this person cultivates dead aura. It absorbs the dead aura of dead people. No wonder there were always disciples missing these days. They were probably used to cultivate this evil technique. Elder Qingmiao also knew what dead aura was, so her complexion instantly turned pale. Dead aura was actually a kind of special spiritual aura. Mortals called life aura yang aura and dead aura yin aura. But in fact, the cultivation world didn't think so. Life aura had both yin and yang, and most people's life auras revolved around yin and yang. However, dead aura was different. It was neither part of the 5 elements nor outside of yin and yang. Therefore, people couldn't come into contact with dead aura. Once they came into contact with dead aura, they would slowly be corroded and eventually lose their lives, becoming dead people. As the name implied, dead aura was the aura that could only exist in dead people. Nowadays, the righteous path and the devil path had been separated for too long, so no one knew whether the devil path could cultivate dead aura or not. However, they knew it was absolutely impossible for the righteous path to cultivate dead aura. Senior Martial Sister. Elder Qingmiao was a bit panicked. What should we do? Elder Qingyi wasn't much better than her, but she was a bit calmer now. After thinking about it, she clenched her teeth and said, "Dante on real fire. Dead aura is afraid of fire." However, Ren Yufeng was still in front of them. How could they find the time to refine the dead aura invading their bodies? Senior Martial Sisters. Unexpectedly, Elder Qingxi came out. Her complexion was pale and her body was floating. Obviously, her spiritual aura hadn't recovered yet. I'll stop him. Junior Martial Sister Qingxi. Elder Qingxi didn't say anything. A flower basket appeared in her hands. The fresh flowers in the basket looked like they were just plucked. Their fragrance assailed everyone's nostrils. Ren Yufeng didn't take Elder Qingxi seriously at all. He sneered and devil aura started to wander around his fingers. With a heavy expression, Elder Qingxi put her hand into the flower basket and sprinkled a handful of petals. These petals were obviously light, but they carried raging spiritual aura as they drifted towards Ren Yufeng's face. With a sullen expression, Ren Yufeng raised his hand and devil aura gathered between his fingers. As soon as the petals came into contact with the devil aura, they were unexpectedly corroded and turned black in an instant. Elder Qingxi's expression changed. You! Ha 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 ha! Ren Yufeng threw his head back and laughed. You overestimate yourself. He waved his sleeve, causing a gust of black aura to rush out and wrap around Elder Qingxi. Ah! Elder Qingxi cried out in pain, and the flower basket in her hands fell to the ground. Upon seeing this, Mo Tiange steeled her heart and pointed at the space between her eyebrows. If the 3 elders couldn't stop him, she'd lose her life in vain. So she'd better escape into the virtual sky world to hide for a while. The bead between her eyebrows shone. She chanted an incantation and shot out a spiritual aura. In an instant, she was submerged by the light. The light soon dispersed. Mo Tiange thought she was already inside the virtual sky world, But the next moment she was shocked. She was still in the same place. She didn't enter the virtual sky world. What was wrong with her? Emotinga's face was deathly pale. She pointed at the space between her eyebrows again and summoned the bead. The bead was still shining, but after she cast the incantation, there was still no reaction. She suddenly panicked. Why couldn't she enter the virtual sky world? This was her last life-saving method. What could she do if she couldn't enter? Suddenly, she felt pain in her arm. She looked down and saw the faintly discernible dead aura wrapped around it. Dead aura. This dead aura destroyed her body of origin. So her body couldn't form a primal chaos. So she couldn't open the virtual sky world. But now, the three elders obviously couldn't hold on anymore. With Ren Yufeng's current twisted personality, he definitely wouldn't spare her life. What should I do? What should I do? Emotinga broke out in a cold sweat as she watched the scene before her. Chapter 211. Emotinga never cared about relying on the virtual sky world. Since she was lucky enough to obtain a unique treasure like the virtual sky world, and others couldn't take it away, she naturally had to make the best use of it. All along, with this backing, she had less apprehension when she was in danger compared to others. But she never expected that one day, she wouldn't be able to enter the virtual sky world. Emotinga broke out in a cold sweat as she watched Elder Qingxi being entangled by the dead aura. If she didn't have the virtual sky world, she would have to think of another way to escape. But given the current situation, she definitely couldn't defeat Ren Yufeng. Senior Martial Sister. Xia Qing staggered out of the concocting room with bloodstains on her chest. Apparently, she was also injured by the spiritual aura fluctuations from their fight of magical powers just now. Wei Haolan had already fainted. She was injured by the spiritual aura fluctuations twice in a row. The first time, she bore the brunt. The second time, she was protected by the 4 symbols 100 flowers formation, which weakened the spiritual aura pressure around her. Emotinga also happened to summon the white silk handkerchief. Otherwise, she might have already lost her life. Emotinga looked up, anxiously watching the scene in front of her. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao were seriously injured and entangled by the dead aura. Elder Qingxi was now fighting Ren Yufeng alone and was already at a disadvantage. Ren Yufeng seemed to be enjoying the pleasure of a cat teasing a mouse. He could obviously defeat Elder Qingxi very quickly, but he still took his time and watched as Elder Qingxi struggled to support herself. His eyes were filled with cruel pleasure. Senior Martial Sisters. Elder Qingxi suddenly shouted with a resolute expression on her face. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao looked up and saw Elder Qingxi throwing away her flower basket magic weapon. She folded her palms and forced out a bright spiritual light from her body. She shouted, "Take them away!" Emotinga still didn't understand what was going on, but she saw Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao's faces filled with pain. Junior Martial Sister. Elder Qingxi looked cold and solemn, her gaze resolute. Obviously, she had made up her mind. The spiritual light on her body became brighter and brighter, almost making people unable to open their eyes. Ren Yufeng looked up and laughed. "You want to detonate your gold core? Naive." A strange smile appeared on Elder Qingxi's face. "Really?" Before Ren Yufeng could figure out what was going on, he saw the spiritual light suddenly explode, enveloping his whole body. Even his dead aura was firmly entangled. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao made a prompt decision and shouted, "Let's go." After saying that, they each grabbed a disciple and quickly fled outside. The people they captured were naturally Wei Haolan and Xia Qing. After all, Emotinga was an outsider. Nevertheless, Emotinga seized this moment to launch the land-fleeing ruler. This land-fleeing ruler was something Emotinga conveniently stole from Yunwu Sect's sect head hall when she fled from Yunwu Sect. At the same time, he also gave her the heaven and earth cloud silk armor. These two things were useless to Qin Shi, so he casually gave them to her. The land-fleeing ruler could travel hundreds or thousands of miles at any time. Emotinga very rarely used it. First, she didn't need to run when facing foundation-building cultivators. But when facing cultivators in the core formation realm or above, several hundred to 500 kilometers wasn't a long distance. Second, She didn't know where she would end up, and she might end up in a dangerous place. Third, it consumed too much spiritual aura and was very difficult to activate, so she might as well directly enter the virtual sky world. But in today's situation, she had no choice but to use it. She couldn't enter the virtual sky world, but her spiritual aura was still intact, and she was inside Bishuan Court's territory, so there shouldn't be any danger nearby. Even if there was danger, it wouldn't be as dangerous as Ren Yufeng. The land-fleeing ruler was successfully launched. The light dispersed and Mo Tiange opened her eyes. The floating pagoda in front of her was actually the Tao-achieving pagoda, although Bishuan Court occupied a vast area. If she traveled more than 500 kilometers, she should have left the sect. Apparently, she only traveled several hundred kilometers this time. Time was tight, so Mo Tiange was just about to escape when she suddenly paused and turned to look at the direction she came from. She saw Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao, each holding Wei Haolan and Xia Qing, flying towards her. Upon seeing Mo Tiange standing there, the two elders were both startled. "Little friendy, how did you?" The flying speed of a core formation cultivator was already astonishing. Just a moment ago, Mo Tiange was still left behind by them. So how did she end up here in a flash? Without waiting for her to answer, Elder Qingyi said, "There's no time. We'll talk inside." Elder Qingmiao nodded. The two of them made hand seals to open the transporting formation in the pagoda. Elder Qingyi turned towards Mo Tiange and said, "Little friendy, since you also escaped, you might as well enter the pagoda to hide." Mo Tiange was thinking that no matter how fast her flying speed was, she wouldn't be faster than Ren Yufeng, so she immediately nodded. "Thank you, elders." The five of them stepped onto the transporting formation. With a flash of light, they entered the pagoda. Elder Qingmiao hesitated for a moment, then said, "What about the other disciples?" Elder Qingyi's gaze was filled with sorrow. She shook her head and said, "It's too late. Their flying speed is too slow. By the time they enter the pagoda, that devil cultivator would have already caught up." Upon hearing that, Elder Qingmiao clenched her teeth. She then raised her palm, condensed a spiritual light, and closed the transporting formation. When the transporting formation was closed, the two elders put the two juniors down and smiled bitterly at each other. Closing the transporting formation was tantamount to giving up on more than 1,000 Bishuan Court disciples. Xia Qing looked up and asked anxiously, "Martial uncles, where's Martial Uncle Qingxi?" Upon hearing her question, Elder Qingmiao sighed and said with a gloomy expression, "Your martial uncle Qingxi used a blood-forbidden secret technique to entangle that devil cultivator. She definitely won't survive." Xia Qing was dumbfounded. Then can she kill that devil cultivator?" Elder Qingyi shook her head. "That devil cultivator's divine power is treacherous, and he also has dead aura. I'm afraid your martial uncle Qingxi can only entangle him for a while. She won't be able to kill him." Xia Qing bit her lip. "If that's the case, then our Bishuan Court." Elder Qingyi closed her eyes. Her voice trembled as she said, "We can't. Those disciples, it'll depend on their luck." Elder Qingmiao heaved a deep sigh. Her gaze was bleak. "I'm afraid Bishuan Court's several thousand years of foundation will be destroyed in our hands." After a long period of silence, Elder Qingyi finally showed a determined expression. "All right, let's heal our injuries first. We can rebuild the group after it's destroyed." Elder Qingmiao was silent for a while, then nodded. "Senior martial sister is right. We can't let junior martial sister Qingxi's sacrifice be in vain." Wei Haolan's injuries were very serious, and the two elders' injuries weren't light either. Only Xia Qing's injuries were relatively light. The five of them went up to the third floor. Elder Qingyi looked at the silent Mo Tiange behind them and said, "Little friendy, as you can see, we're old, weak, sick, and disabled right now, so we can't take care of you. You can do as you please. It'll be fine as long as you don't touch the restrictions in this pagoda." Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Senior Qingyi, is this pagoda safe?" "This pagoda was built by the founder of my group, Primordial Lady Bishui. It's covered in layers of restrictions that even nascent soul cultivators can't break through. That devil cultivator's cultivation level is only in the core formation realm, so I reckon she won't be able to do anything." Emotinga felt a bit relieved, but when she thought about the countless Bichuan court disciples outside, she also sighed. Although she always cared about her own safety, thousands of people might die just like that. It wasn't a happy thing after all. In particular, Ren Yufeng came to Linhai together with her. After thinking for a moment, she took out the jade bottle inside her robe. Seniors, this is a secret healing medicine my master gave me before I left. Perhaps it'll be helpful to you. Since you allowed me to enter the pagoda to hide, consider it my repayment. Elder Qingyi nodded and accepted it. Thank you. With a formidable enemy in front of them, everyone else had no other thoughts. Aside from Xia Qing, who was looking after Wei Haolan, everyone else went off to treat their injuries. Emotinga's injuries weren't light either. Most importantly, her body carried dead aura. If she couldn't get rid of the dead aura, she wouldn't be able to enter the virtual sky world. Just thinking about this gave her a headache. She had no choice but to find a corner to treat her injuries. Since the two elders understood dead aura, they might have a way, so she could only treat her injuries first. Before long, spiritual aura fluctuations came from the transporting formation. Emotinga opened her eyes and was shocked. Xiaqing called out, "Senior Martial Brother Tang? Why are you here?" The person who appeared on the transporting formation was Tang Shen. He also looked at everyone in front of him with surprise. "Shen, Elder Qingyi called out. "Have you been here all this time?" Tang Shen nodded. "Great-grandmother said I wasn't sensible last time, so she told me to face the wall for a month." Last time, he must have been asking Emotinga to leave with her. Seeing that all of them were injured, Tang Shen was a bit panicked. "Elders, what's wrong?" Elder Qingmiao sighed and said, "Shen, this is also your luck. At least your great-grandmother's sacrifice wasn't in vain." Tang Shen was dumbfounded. "Elder, you mean?" Xiaqing rubbed her eyes and said in a low voice, "Senior Martial Brother Tang. When we were concocting medicinal pills, Senior Martial Brother Shangguan colluded with a devil cultivator and injured 3 elders. To help us escape, Elder Qingxi used the blood prohibition secret technique." Tang Shen felt as if he was struck by lightning. The blood prohibition secret technique. Xiaqing wiped her tears and nodded while sobbing. That devil cultivator was really powerful. We could only hide in the pagoda. Right now, Senior Martial Sister Sect Head is seriously injured, and the 2 elders aren't much better off. We can't take care of the other disciples. These few sentences made Tang Shen understand the current situation. His face turned deathly pale. How could this be? Just a moment ago, he was still Elder Qingxi's beloved grandson, and Bichuan Court was still the biggest cultivation group in Linhai. All of a sudden, he lost his great-grandmother, and the group was facing an unprecedented disaster. Then what about my mother? What about aunts and the others? And Anne? Elder Qingyi heaved a long sigh. "Shen, you have to restrain your decline and adapt to the changes. We really can't take care of the other disciples. Your great-grandmother used the blood prohibition secret technique, but I'm afraid she can only hold that devil cultivator for a while. We simply don't have time to disperse the disciples," Xiaqing said in a low voice. "Just now, the 2 elders already told the disciples to scatter and flee for their lives. Now, it all depends on each person's luck." Tang Shen couldn't stand steadily and fell to the ground. They. Before Tang Shen could finish speaking, a voice rang out from outside. "2 old women, why don't you care about your disciples? Do you think I won't be able to do anything if you hide in the pagoda?" Emotinga's expression changed. She stood up then walked towards the small window on the edge of the pagoda. She saw Ren Yufeng shrouded in black aura from head to toe. His aura was monstrous. "Won't come out. I'll kill all your disciples." Elder Qingyi shook her head. "No need to care about him. If we go out, we'll just be throwing our lives away in vain." Ren Yufeng was still shouting outside. "What's wrong? Don't you want to come out and see your junior martial sister? She wanted to kill me, so I killed her and even dismembered her body. Ha 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 ha." Tang Shen was greatly shaken. Trembling, he ran over. Through the window, he saw a head in Ren Yufeng's hand. It was Elder Qingxi. "Great-grandmother," Tang Shen called out. He closed his eyes then fell to the ground with a plop. "Fellow Taoist Tang, Chapter 212. Emotinga silently sat in the corner to heal herself. It had been 3 days since they escaped into the pagoda. Wei Haolan had already woken up, but her injuries were too severe, so she was still in a coma from time to time. The two elders' injuries hadn't healed yet, so they were seizing the time to resist the invasion of the dead aura. Xiaqing stared at Wei Haolan. Tang Shen shrank in the corner with a lifeless expression. Outside, Ren Yufeng had already tried all kinds of methods, but sure enough, he couldn't break the Dao Achieving Pagoda's restrictions. In the beginning, he still shouted for Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao to come out. Occasionally, he caught 1 or 2 Bishuan court disciples and tortured them to stimulate the people inside the pagoda. However, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao weren't impulsive people. They were old and shrewd, seeing that they were seriously injured, and that if they went out, not only would they not be able to save these disciples, but they would also implicate everyone inside the pagoda. They hardened their hearts and pretended not to hear anything. Because of that, Ren Yufeng also felt bored and didn't feel like talking anymore. Later on, he went somewhere unknown. However, they weren't sure they could defeat Ren Yufeng, so they didn't dare to go out of the pagoda. Who knew whether Ren Yufeng was outside or not? Emotienga opened her eyes. She frowned when she saw the dead aura still wrapped around her body. Her injuries weren't too serious. Her meridians had passed through the 5 spirits cultivating body, and she also had the 4 symbols 100 flowers formation and the white silk handkerchief to block the impact. Presumably, her injuries would be healed in a month. However, the dead aura in front of her made her feel very helpless. This dead aura not only couldn't be dissolved by her spiritual aura, but it also invaded her meridians. She already felt half of her arm go numb, but there was nothing she could do. Little friend Yi. Upon hearing the voice, Emotienga looked up and saw that Elder Qingyi had stopped healing and was looking at her. Senior, Elder Qingyi said, this devil cultivator must be the enemy little friend Yi talked about, right? I didn't ask in detail before, so can you tell me now? What's his origin, and what kind of grudge he has against you? Emotienga paused for a moment, then said honestly, since Senior asked, I'll tell you in detail. About several months ago, I traveled to the northernmost glaciers and happened to run into an old friend. He's now a disciple of Zhengfa sect. The two of us met again, and he invited me to explore a secret place. Aside from things like the virtual sky world and other secrets related to her life-saving method, Emotienga told him everything. She didn't want to divulge things like the secret of the land of hiding dragon. She didn't go into detail about the treasures in the underground palace. Elder Qingyi had rich experience. Since Emotienga didn't want to talk about these trivial details, she also didn't ask. The underwater palace suddenly collapsed. I thought I was going to lose my life, but when I woke up, I found myself in Linhai. Emotienga shook her head and smiled bitterly. Senior asked me what kind of enmity I have with him. In fact, what kind of enmity do I have with him? It's just that this person has bad intentions. I just happened to escape, so he wants to kill me to silence me. I see. Elder Qingyi nodded slightly. In that case, little friend Yi can't be blamed. Emotienga knew that before she explained everything clearly, the two elders must have had a knot in their hearts and suspected that she was the one who attracted this malefic star. Therefore, she explained everything in detail, including the names of people and places. She did this to make the two elders understand that Ren Yufeng didn't come to Bishuan Court to kill her. The reason Bishuan Court faced this sect extermination disaster was because they were very unlucky to run into Ren Yufeng, thus provoking this disaster. Emotienga breathed a sigh of relief when she heard what Elder Qingyi said. It was fine as long as the two elders didn't blame her. Ren Yufeng was outside now, so if she offended the two elders, she'd be in danger. I never expected this person to be a disciple of Zhengfa sect. A dignified disciple of a famous sect actually embarked on the path of a devil cultivator. Elder Qingmiao also stopped treating her injuries and opened her eyes. Emotienga said, this person entered a demonic barrier from the very beginning, so he easily became a devil cultivator. How could it be so easy to directly advance from the foundation building realm to the core formation realm? In my opinion, This so-called divine dragon secret technique of his must have some flaws. You're right. Elder Chingy nodded. I also know a little about devil path cultivation techniques. Although devil path cultivation techniques advance faster than our righteous path cultivation techniques, they can't be achieved overnight like this. This person must have cultivated some kind of evil technique, but I can't see any disadvantages for now. In fact, one of the disadvantages is already very obvious. Elder Qingmiao took over the conversation. Senior Martial Sister, did you see this person? Under the corrosion of the dead aura, he's already withered. He doesn't look like a human at all. Elder Qingyi muttered to herself for a while, then nodded. Yes, during the fight of magical powers, I vaguely saw his face. Under the dead aura, it simply didn't look like a living person's face. I'm afraid he's already a living dead person now. Mo Tinga thought for a while, then asked, Elders, what should we do next? This question caused the two elders to ponder deeply. What should they do next? Of course, they had to find a way to eliminate Ren Yufeng, leave the pagoda, then rebuild Bishuan Court. However, among the 6 people in the pagoda, only 2 were core formation cultivators, and both of them were seriously injured. As for the others, Wei Haolan's injuries were so serious that she was half dead. Mo Tinga guessed that even if her injuries were healed, her cultivation level would still regress. Xia Qing and Tang Shen were both in the early stage of the foundation building realm, and their talents were also very ordinary. As for Mo Tinga herself, although her injuries weren't serious, she was surrounded by dead aura. Not to mention making a realm breakthrough. Even controlling the dead aura wouldn't be easy. Thinking up to this point made Mo Tinga feel a bit desperate. Could it be that they could only wait for Ren Yufeng to make a mistake in his own cultivation? How many months and years would that take? After a long time, Elder Qingyi finally said, Let's go to the 7th floor. Elder Qingmiao was startled. Senior Martial Sister. Elder Qingyi waved her hand, stopping her from continuing. She looked exhausted. There's no other way. Right now, Bishuan Court's basically been exterminated. Aside from going to the 7th floor, what else can we do? Elder Qingmiao was dejected and speechless. Elder Qingyi looked up and swept her gaze over the several juniors. Xia Qing, take care of Haolan. Shen'er, little friend, come with us. Tang Shen was sitting in a corner in a daze. When he heard what Elder Qingmiao said, he looked up, but he looked like he was in a trance. Elder Qingmiao frowned, then shouted, Shen'er, your great-grandmother's already dead. Do you want her to die with everlasting regret looking like this? Tang Shen's complexion paled. He clenched his teeth, then said in a low voice, Elders, I understand. Elder Qingmiao nodded. Together with Elder Qingyi, they led the 2 juniors into the transporting formation. The 4th and 5th floors weren't any different from the 3rd floor. They only had cultivation objects on them. Presumably, the 3 elders usually lived on 1 floor each. When they arrived at the 6th floor, Mo Tinga saw that there was only one huge transporting formation, but it was arranged in the shape of the Big Dipper. After passing through the last transporting formation, they finally arrived at the 7th floor. This floor was actually smaller than the other floors. It was surrounded by densely packed shelves with all kinds of jade slips, books, magic tools, magic weapons, and other things on them. In the center of the floor, there was a jade incense burner, on which a jade statue as tall as 2 people were enshrined. When Mo Tinga looked up and saw the face of this jade statue, her expression changed greatly in an instant. This 7th floor stores several thousand years of Bishuan Court's treasures, and also enshrines our sect's founder, Primordial Lady Bishui. Little friend Yi, what's wrong? Just as she was about to introduce the floor to them, Mo Tinga suddenly stood there in a daze, as if she was struck by lightning. Elder Qingyi frowned as she stared at Primordial Lady Bishui's statue. If it weren't for the fact that Bishuan Court was equivalent to being exterminated, and they didn't have anyone they could use, they definitely wouldn't have let non-disciples enter the 7th floor. But what was with this little friend Ye's reaction? Mo Tinga finally regained her train of thought, but she asked eagerly, Elders, may I ask what the name of your sect's founder is? Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao glanced at each other. Their gazes were filled with doubt. What does little friend Yi mean? Mo Tinga bit her lip, then raised her head to look at the statue again. This appearance was clearly the same as the image of Mo Yaoqing she saw more than 30 years ago. The image of Mo Yaoqing engraved in her mind. She never thought primordial Lady Bishui would be Mo Yaoqing, because according to the information she gathered, Bishuang Court was established about 10,000 years ago. Wanderer Ziwei said he and Zhong Muling were cultivators from the same period, and Zhong Muling passed away about 5,000 years ago. Taking into account his lifespan, he was a cultivator from 7,000 years ago at most. Mo Yaoqing was naturally a cultivator from the same period, so the timing didn't match. However, the statue in front of her was clearly Mo Yaoqing's image. Back then, when she triggered the restriction Mo Yaoqing left behind, Mo Yaoqing not only used the art of Sunu, but also forcibly engraved her own life experience in her sea of knowledge, so she absolutely couldn't be mistaken. They were both female cultivators, both in the nascent soul realm. Mo Tiange absolutely didn't believe there could be such a coincidence that a nascent soul female cultivator, who looked exactly like Mo Yaoqing, lived 10,000 years ago. Elders, your group wasn't established 10,000 years ago, right? Was the founder's surname Mo, and her name was Yaoqing? Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao's expressions changed greatly. The two of them glanced at each other, then Elder Qingyi said, correct. Bishuang Court was established about 6,000 years ago. The so-called 10,000 years is because it's been a long time, so outsiders have long forgotten about it. Little friend Yi, how did you know the name of my founder? Mo Tiange revealed a bitter smile. There was actually such a coincidence in this world. Mo Yaoqing came from Yunzhong, so maybe when she arrived in the celestial pole, her first stop was probably Linhai. She had a pure Yin constitution and was schemed against by others, so she naturally hated those cultivators who used women as human furnaces. It was probably because of this that she established Bishuan Court. My original surname was Mo, and my name was Tiange, she said slowly. I was born in a place called Mo's village in the secular world. Our Mo family's ancestor was called Mo Yaoqing. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao widened their eyes and stared at her. Mo Tiange smiled bitterly. I inherited my cultivation technique from this ancestor. Elder Qingyi stared at her and said slowly, the art of Sunu? Correct. Mo Tiange sighed and said, when I was a child, I triggered the restriction my ancestor left in the ancestral hall and obtained the art of Sunu. That was how I was able to step onto the path of immortality. So little friend Yi has a pure Yin constitution? Elder Qingmiao asked anxiously. Mo Tiange nodded. She stared at Mo Yaoqing's statue and sighed with emotion. I didn't expect that after several decades, I'd actually come to Linhai. She accurately said Mo Yaoqing's name, and she also possessed the art of Sunu, so the two elders already believed her. However, it was actually such a coincidence that they found it hard to believe. Little friend Yi, can you let me examine your aptitude? Since she'd already said it, there was nothing to hide, so Mo Tiange stretched out her hand. Elder Qingyi felt her meridians, and her expression became increasingly solemn. Elder Qingmiao then did the same. Both of them were speechless after they finished examining her. Pure Yin constitution. Pure Yin constitution. Ever since our founder passed down the art of Sunu, our Bishuang Court has never received a female cultivator with a pure Yin constitution. Today, we actually met our founder's descendant. Elder Qingyi heaved a sigh and stared at Mo Tiange. Perhaps this is fate. Our Bishuang Court is facing extermination, but Grandmaster has a successor. Chapter 213. Mo Tiange had her own considerations as to why she told them the secret of her pure Yin constitution. First, Bishuang Court was a cultivation group for female cultivators. Among the 6 people in the pagoda, only Tang Shun was a man. Judging from Tang Shun's words and actions, he really couldn't handle such a big responsibility. If it was Elder Qingxi, she might be considerate of Tang Shun, but Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao had no reason to force her. Second, the 6 of them were trapped in the Dao Achieving Pagoda, and were now in the same boat, so Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao didn't have any reason to harm her. Third, although cultivators in the cultivation world were self-interested, Cultivators and cultivation groups were very respectful to their sect founders. For Mo Yaoqing's sake, they wouldn't do anything to her. Finally, and most importantly, Mo Tiange herself only obtained a part of Mo Yaoqing's art of Sunu, and didn't obtain any other secret techniques. If Bishuan Court was a cultivation group established by Mo Yaoqing, it was very likely that Mo Yaoqing passed away here, and her secret techniques were also left here. Mo Tiange already guessed the reason Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao called her, and Tang Shen here was because they needed help. Knowing she was the descendant of the sect founder, and that she had a special constitution, it was very likely that they'd pass some of the founder's secret techniques to her. With powerful enemies outside, she really needed to strengthen herself. She was right. After learning she was Mo Yaoqing's descendant, and confirming she also had a pure Yin constitution, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao gave her a jade slip that supposedly recorded some of Mo Yaoqing's unique secret techniques. Elder Qingyi sighed and said, "Unfortunately, you're not a disciple of Bishuan Court." Otherwise, Mo Tiange just smiled and didn't answer. It was impossible for her to stay in Bishuan Court. Even if Bishuan Court's founder was Mo family's ancestor, she couldn't leave Xianqing School just to revive Bishuan Court. She had no interest in being in charge of a cultivation group at all. Her goal was to achieve Dao and become an immortal. However, Bishuan Court had such a relationship with her, so if she made some achievements in the future, it wouldn't be a problem for her to take care of it. In the following time, aside from healing, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao taught Tang Shen some spells, and gave her pointers on how to heal. As it turned out, Det Aura was only afraid of fire, so they could only slowly use their Dantian real fire to devour and dissolve it. However, the Dantian real fire of a foundation-building cultivator was still very weak, and Ren Yufeng's Det Aura was also very powerful. It would take Mo Tiange at least more than 10 years to completely dissolve this Det Aura. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao's injuries were even worse, so they couldn't help her at all. Mo Tiange, on the other hand, wasn't worried at all. She had a temperament that could endure loneliness, and she was still young, so she could afford to wait. Seeing that she was so calm, Qingyi and Qingmiao admired her even more. Nevertheless, Mo Tiange already had a cultivation group, so it was impossible for her to leave Xianqing School and join Bishuan Court. However, Mo Tiange always felt that the gazes the two elders and Tang Shen gave her after learning her secret were very strange. Putting aside the two elders, Tang Shen's gaze always made her feel a little ambiguous. Could it be that Tang Shen had some thoughts about her? This was not impossible. His great-grandmother, who loved him dearly, had been brutally dismembered, and there was no news of his other relatives. If he wanted revenge, it was possible that she was his target. However, with his weak personality, Mo Tiange didn't take him seriously at all. Before she could ask this question, the two elders went to look for her first. "Seniors," Mo Tiange called out once she stepped onto the 4th floor. Now the 3rd floor was the place where the 4 juniors recuperated and cultivated. The two elders needed peace and quiet, so they recuperated on the 4th floor. Upon seeing her coming up, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao both smiled. "Tiange, quickly come and sit." After learning about her past, the two of them treated her a lot closer, and now called her by her name. Mo Tiange lowered her head and returned their greeting. She then picked up a small chair across from the two elders and sat down. "How are your injuries these days?" Elder Qingyi asked first. Mo Tiange answered calmly, "They're still the same. This Det Aura is really powerful, so I can only slowly refine it now." The two elders naturally understood this situation, but they just wanted to find a topic to talk about. The two of them glanced at each other, but Elder Qingyi still spoke. "There's one thing we've been thinking about for a long time, but we still think we should tell you," Elder Qingyi said slowly. "To be honest, before you confessed about your past, we also didn't expect there would be such a coincidence." Upon seeing the two elders' cautious expressions, Mo Tiange's expression also became solemn. "Seniors, please speak frankly. Is there something wrong with it?" "No." Elder Qingmiao sighed with emotion. "On the contrary, it's very good." Mo Tiange wrinkled her brows in confusion. Elder Qingyi smiled. "Forget it, I'll be frank with you. Presumably, you've also noticed that we weren't only surprised to learn you have a pure Yin constitution. In fact, the reason is very simple. Although we've never seen a pure Yin constitution, we've seen a pure Yang constitution. Emo Tiange was startled. She immediately recalled Tang Shun's words and actions in the past few days, and her expression darkened. Upon seeing her expression, Elder Qingmiao smiled and said, "It seems you've already guessed it." Yes, the most important reason why Shen is so doted on by junior martial sister Qingxi, and the female disciples in the group are all jealous of him. I see. Even if Bishuan Court was a cultivation group for female cultivators, and even if there weren't many high-level male cultivators in Linhai, it didn't make sense for a male cultivator with a weak temperament like Tang Shen to be so popular. So this was the real reason. Emo Tiange calmed herself down and said faintly, "In that case, what do the two seniors think about this matter?" A pure Yang constitution was naturally the best dual cultivation partner for a pure Yin constitution, but these two constitutions were hard to find even in 1,000 years. Take Yuan Bao and Emo Yaoqing for example. One had a pure Yang constitution, and the other had a pure Yin constitution. Although they were cultivators from the same generation, there was actually a gap of several hundred years between them, and they were very far apart. If the two of them hadn't coincidentally met Zhong Muling, they probably wouldn't have met each other in their lives. However, although pure Yang and pure Yin constitutions were a match made in heaven, Yuan Bao and Emo Yaoqing didn't have a good impression of each other, and they never planned to perform dual cultivation together. Emo Tiange never thought she'd meet a male cultivator with a pure Yang constitution who lived in the same generation as her. Moreover, he was about the same age as her, and his cultivation level was also quite close. Nevertheless, she once imagined that if she were Emo Yaoqing, would she perform dual cultivation with Yuan Bao? As soon as this thought emerged, she immediately extinguished it. Yes, the path to immortality was difficult, but the path of cultivation relied on one's own efforts. Relying on dual cultivation ultimately went against the original intention of cultivation. Besides, she also disdained handing over her body for this reason. As she stared at Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao, Emo Tiange made up her mind. If they made this request, she absolutely wouldn't agree. She wasn't afraid of them forcing her. How could this kind of thing be forced by outsiders? Besides, they had no one to use now, so they most likely wouldn't choose to have a falling out with her. As if she could see through her thoughts, Elder Qingyi smiled and said, "Tiange, with your current cultivation level, even if you don't perform dual cultivation, presumably, forming your gold core won't be a problem. However, dual cultivation also has a lot of benefits, so you can think about it carefully." Upon hearing that Elder Qingyi didn't seem to have any intention of forcing her, Emo Tiange secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Although she'd already made up her mind, she still didn't want to have a conflict with the two elders in the current situation. It was best if they didn't have any intention of forcing her. "Seniors, please don't mention this matter again. I once heard that great-grandmother also met a male cultivator with a pure Yang constitution, but she never had any intention of performing dual cultivation with him. Presumably, great-grandmother was a proud person and disdained using this kind of method to seek immortality. Although my cultivation level isn't as good as great-grandmother's, our hearts are the same." Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao were silent upon hearing this. Selfishly speaking, they naturally hoped Emo Tiange could perform dual cultivation with Tang Shen. That way, even if Emo Tiange still had to return to Xianqing School in the end, it would still give Bishuan Court hope. Moreover, dual cultivation with pure Yin and pure Yang constitutions, needless to say, their cultivation levels would advance very quickly. However, they all knew what kind of person Tang Shen was. His cultivation level was ordinary, and he had a weak personality. If it was any other female cultivator in the school, they might have liked his face. Emo Tiange, on the other hand, came from Kunwu, so he couldn't arouse her interest at all. Most importantly, they proposed dual cultivation for Emo Tiange's sake. With Tang Shen's character, he was doomed to have no great achievements. If Emo Tiange herself objected, it would be meaningless. Thinking up to this point, Elder Qingyi heaved a long sigh and said, "You have your own ideas, so we can't do anything about it. That being the case, you don't need to worry. Shinner won't do anything out of line." Mo Tiange wasn't worried about this at all. Even if Tang Shun had any ideas, she wouldn't be afraid. "In addition, there's one more thing we want to discuss with you," Elder Qingyi said after some deliberation. As long as they didn't force her to perform dual cultivation, Mo Tiange didn't mind doing something for Bishuan Court. "Senior, please speak frankly. If it's something I can do, I'll certainly do my best." Elder Qingyi smiled. "Since you have this kind of relationship with our school, we originally hoped you could stay in Bishuan Court. However, your Dao heart is firm, and you're unwilling to be troubled by secular matters, so we can't force you. However, you also know Bishuan Court's current situation. Even if most of these disciples manage to escape, we'll still have to spend a lot of energy to rebuild Bishuan Court after we kill that devil cultivator, Junior Marshal Sister Qingmiao, and I already thought of a way to deal with that devil cultivator. But the task of rebuilding the group will fall to the younger generation. Haolan's injuries are heavy, and even if she recovers, her cultivation level will most likely drop to the aura refining realm. Xiaqing and Shinner aren't ordinary people. Therefore, we hope you can agree to be our Bishuan Court's guest elder." Mo Tiange raised her brows slightly then asked, "Seniors, do you want to sacrifice your lives to kill Ren Yufeng?" She was so keenly aware of the meaning behind their words that the two elders could only smile wryly. Elder Qingmiao said, "Correct. Senior Marshal Sister Qingyi and I suffered serious injuries, so our lifespans are affected. We can live for 30 to 50 years at most. Among the 6 people in the pagoda, Haolan's injuries are too heavy, so it'll be very difficult for her to have any great achievements in the future. Xiaqing and Shinner aren't too enthusiastic about cultivation, so if the two of us fall, Bishuan Court really won't have any hope. If that's the case, we might as well stake our lives. If we can kill that devil cultivator, with Haolan's ability to manage things, rebuilding Bishuan Court won't be a problem." At this point, the two elders both looked at her. "Therefore, Tiange, we hope you can become Bishuan Court's guest elder to intimidate those who don't obey us." It was snowing, so it was freezing. Chapter 214. Mo Tiange lowered her gaze as if she was thinking. Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao didn't say anything and just stared at her. After a long time, Mo Tiange finally said, "Reasonably speaking, I should repay the secret technique the two elders gave Junior's great-grandmother. However, with Junior's current cultivation level, I don't think I'm qualified to be a guest elder." Since she didn't sound like she was going to refuse, Elder Qingyi smiled and said, "We two old women won't live for long. When the time comes, there won't be any core formation cultivators in the group, so there's nothing wrong with making you an elder. Besides, with your current cultivation level and talent, it probably won't be difficult for you to form your gold core." At this point, she paused for a moment then sighed. "Tiange, the 3 of them aren't enough to rebuild Bishuan Court. I hope you can lend us a hand for the sake of the founder." Such a sincere request actually made it hard for Mo Tiange to refuse. She thought for a moment then asked, "If Junior is willing to be a guest elder, how long will I stay in Linhai?" Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao smiled. Elder Qingmiao said, "Not too long. You're a guest elder. As long as Haolan calls the disciples back and establishes her prestige, you can use closed-door meditation as an excuse to return to Kunwu. But I'm a Xianqing school disciple. Is it too bad for me to become a guest elder of another cultivation group?" Elder Qingyi said, "You don't have to worry about this. There are also disciples from big cultivation groups who become guest elders of other cultivation groups, as long as there's no conflict between the two cultivation groups. Bishuan Court is in Linhai and has no intention of going to Kunwu, so it naturally won't affect you. If you're still worried, you can go back to the group and report to your master." Upon hearing how relaxed Elder Qingyi was, Mo Tiange thought for a moment then slowly nodded. "If that's the case, Junior doesn't mind doing my part for Bishuan Court. It can also be considered as repaying seniors for giving me the book." Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao finally felt relieved after receiving her approval. They smiled and said, "Good, good. From now on, we're on the same side." As they spoke, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao personally led Emotienga down to the third floor and announced to the other three that they were inviting Emotienga to become a guest elder of Bishuan Court. This news was still quite shocking. Xiaqing couldn't snap back to reality for a moment. Wei Haolan and Tang Shun, who had just regained consciousness, had complicated expressions on their faces. Emotienga faced them all with a smile. The so-called guest elders had the title of an elder, but they only took offerings and did not interfere with the affairs of the sect. They all knew Emotienga was a disciple of Xianqing school, so there was no reason for her to stay at Bishuan Court. There was no conflict between them and Emotienga, so they were only shocked for a moment before they quickly regained their composure. They congratulated her and greeted her again. After they finished greeting each other, Qingyi and Qingmiao returned to the fourth floor to recuperate, while Emotienga stayed on the third floor. Fellow Taoist Yi. Wei Haolan's condition was still very heavy, but she was finally awake now. She greeted Emotienga with a smile. "From now on, we're fellow disciples." Emotienga smiled faintly. Wei Haolan naturally understood the two elders' intentions. Even if her cultivation level was preserved, it would be very difficult for her to make a realm breakthrough in this lifetime. So the elders wanted Emotienga to be her backer. Sect head Wei doesn't need to be so polite. In the future, Bishuan Court will still have to rely on you. There's not much I can do. Wei Haolan smiled. You and I both know what the truth is. Fellow Taoist Yi, in short, I'm counting on you. Wei Haolan was a smart person. It was very comfortable to deal with such a smart person, because she knew how to control the situation well. Therefore, after killing Ren Yufeng, with Wei Haolan around, it shouldn't be too difficult for her to become Bishuan Court's guest elder. After a brief conversation with Wei Haolan, Tang Shen cautiously glanced at her several times. Eventually, he summoned his courage and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Yi, can we talk?" Emotienga was a bit surprised. She never expected Tang Shen would take the initiative to talk to her. After thinking about it for a while, she readily agreed. "Okay." Tang Shen looked at the transporting formation. "Shall we go there?" Emotienga nodded. Presumably, the things she wanted to talk to Tang Shen weren't suitable for Wei Haolan and Xiaqing to know. Once they reached the second floor, Emotienga stopped. "Fellow Taoist Tang, if you have something to say, just say it." Tang Shen lowered his head and was silent for a while before he finally said, "Fellow Taoist, you must already know I have a pure yang constitution." Yes. Tang Shen seemed to be afraid to look at her. He tilted his head and said, "Then, fellow Taoist Yi, what do you think?" Emotienga knew what answer he wanted to hear, so she just smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Tang, you might as well tell me what you think." Tang Shen was silent for a long time before he finally said, "My great-grandmother was killed by that devil cultivator. My relatives are all outside, and I don't know how they're doing. I want to cultivate well, kill that devil, and avenge my great-grandmother." He looked very serious when he said that, and he finally had a little bit of a man's decisiveness. Nevertheless, Emotienga's tone was still flat. So, Tang Shen looked up and said with unprecedented firmness, "Fellow Taoist Yi, can you perform dual cultivation with me?" She knew he wanted to mention this matter, but she still didn't expect Tang Shen, who was as weak as a woman, would directly say it. Emotienga paused. Seeing his pleading expression, she shook her head and said, "I'm sorry, fellow Taoist Tang, but I can't agree to perform dual cultivation with you." Even though Tang Shen had long seen that Emotienga didn't have any feelings for him, he still didn't expect her to refuse him so decisively. He was stunned for a moment before he said anxiously, "Why? Fellow Taoist Yi, I have a pure yang constitution, and you have a pure yin constitution. Being able to meet each other is like a heaven-sent companion. Why would you refuse?" Emotienga smiled faintly. "Fellow Taoist Tang, why haven't you been willing to perform dual cultivation with your fellow martial sisters all these years?" Tang Shen was stunned. He said in a low voice, I don't like them so. Then I'm the same." Emotienga's tone was flat. "You also have no feelings for me, because I have a pure Yin constitution. But if we don't love each other and become dual cultivation partners, what's the difference between us and the past? Tang Shen looked up at her, but didn't say anything. Mo Tiange stared at this young Master Tang who had never suffered before and said, I won't perform dual cultivation for this kind of reason. I want to walk on the path of becoming an immortal step by step. Her tone was so firm that disappointment flashed across Tang Shen's eyes. But he didn't want to give up. Fellow Taoist Yi, if you perform dual cultivation with me, your cultivation level will advance faster. Mo Tiange showed a faint smile. Fellow Taoist Tang, in the end, you're not a woman. Perhaps all cultivators put their own interests first. But for women, staying with someone they don't love is indeed a kind of torture. Of course, it's not that fellow Taoist Tang isn't good. Mo Tiange still had a faint smile on her face, even though she saw his devastated expression. Her eyes flickered. But matters of the heart are like this. I'm a cultivator, but I'm also a woman. Maybe some women can give up their original perseverance for the sake of cultivation. But that doesn't include me. I have my pride, so there are some things I'll stick to until the end. Tang Shen stammered, unable to say anything. Mo Tiange smiled. Fellow Taoist Tang, aren't you the same? Don't be blinded by your ancestors' death. Dual cultivation is, after all, a side path to the great Tao of cultivation. If your goal is also to achieve the great Tao, it'd be better to stick to your original heart and calmly guard it. That way, you'll definitely gain more. It was so cold that her hands were stiff. She temporarily finished writing today's 5,000 words. Chapter 215. Sure enough, after Mo Tiange dismissed him, Tang Shen no longer looked for her. His gaze when he looked at her was no different from before. Obviously, he'd let go of this thought. On the contrary, he cultivated a lot more diligently. Every time he encountered a problem, he would take advantage of the two elders' free time to ask for advice, or ask Mo Tiange. In this current situation, Tang Shen was a help, so Mo Tiange didn't hide anything, and told him everything she knew. As a result, Tang Shen's cultivation level rose very quickly. After all, he had a pure Yang constitution, so his spiritual roots shouldn't be as bad as hers back then. As for other matters, the two core formation elders already had their own plans. Mo Tiange was only a guest elder in name, so she couldn't manage them, and it wasn't convenient for her to talk about them. Besides, she didn't have a better way. Ren Yufeng's strength was too terrifying. She couldn't enter the virtual sky world for the time being, so she couldn't concoct medicinal pills. It was already troublesome enough to refine the dead aura on her body, so it was impossible for her to make a realm breakthrough. Since she couldn't make a realm breakthrough, she couldn't deal with Ren Yufeng, so this matter could only be decided by Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao. On the 7th floor of the Tao Achieving Pagoda, there were several thousand years' worth of Bishuan court savings, which contained a lot of good things. Now that they were facing extermination, Elder Qingyi decided to use these savings. Because of this, Qingxia wholeheartedly focused on concocting medicinal pills after she recovered from her injuries. As for Wei Haolan, she was indispensable in rebuilding the group, so the two elders were extremely generous and gave her the spiritual medicines they'd stored for a long time. Several months later, Wei Haolan's injuries finally stabilized, and she also preserved her cultivation level. However, she was also surrounded by dead aura, so she might need more time to recover than Mo Tiange did. Moreover, her Dantian was injured, so she basically had no hope of advancing to the core formation realm. After learning about this from the two elders, Wei Haolan was dazed for a long time. Even if she was a cultivator who valued power more, it was still hard for her to accept that she might not be able to make a realm breakthrough. Fortunately, Wei Haolan was a strong person and had long prepared for her injuries, so she quickly adjusted her mood. She continued to heal her injuries every day and assisted Xia Qing in concocting medicinal pills. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. Elder Qingyi and Qingmiao finally recovered from their injuries after using spiritual medicines. They announced that they'd enter closed-door meditation to cultivate secret techniques, and that no one was allowed to disturb them on the 4th floor. After learning this news, Wei Haolan and the other two elders were dazed and looked sad, which made Tiange quite confused. She recalled what Qingyi and Qingmiao said when they invited her to be their guest official last time. So she secretly asked Wei Haolan about it. Sect leader Wei, does the secret art that the two elders spoke of harm one's life? Wei Haolan paused for a moment, then said with a sigh, Fellow Taoist, Yi is now Bishuan Court's guest elder, so I should tell you about these things. Sect Wei Ling wafer for Qing I Ling Long from, Ling. Ir Wei. Uphim Sect. The Mo. Sect Long Ling, by Sect Ling. From. I. The second half of this secret technique can only be practiced by cultivators at, or above the core formation stage. Furthermore, it is time-consuming and laborious. Its effect is to combine the cultivation of several people into one. In this way, one will become the most powerful existence among core formation cultivators. In other words, Elder Qingxi used this blood prohibition secret technique? Wei Haolan nodded. Correct. Unfortunately, Elder Qingxi was already seriously injured at that time, and that person's power was extraordinary, so she could only stall him for a short while. What about Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao? Mo Tiange's expression was heavy. What would happen if they used this secret technique? Wei Haolan smiled bitterly. Although this secret technique can be practiced by cultivators in the core formation realm or higher, none of the core formation grandmasters of Bishuan Court ever practiced it. Mo Tiange was stunned. Why is that? Even if they couldn't protect their lives, it was still good to learn it just in case. Why didn't anyone practice it? Because, Wei Haolan said slowly, anyone who practices the second half of the blood prohibition secret technique can no longer be considered a human. Mo Tiange was silent for a long time. Can no longer be considered a human? What did that mean? If they weren't a human, what else could they be? As if she saw through Mo Tiange's confusion, Wei Haolan shook her head and said, the so-called blood prohibition requires blood as the price. If a person's blood is drained, wouldn't they become a mummy? How could they still be considered a human? Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. Wei Haolan looked away, hiding the sadness in her eyes. The two elders are already unafraid of death. We still have to cultivate diligently, rebuild Bishuan Court, and fulfill their unfulfilled wishes. It was no wonder the three of them had such expressions when they learned the two elders were going to practice the secret technique. Practicing this secret technique had doomed them from the very beginning. Whether they succeeded or not, they would still die. With such a heavy heart, Mo Tiange threw herself into recuperating and practicing spells. A strong enemy was right next to her, but she couldn't do anything. This kind of feeling was too unbearable. Ever since she built her foundation, she'd never had such an urgent desire to become stronger. Therefore, after confirming she had to spend a lot of time refining the dead aura, she devoted all her energy to studying the jade slip Mo Yaoqing left behind. In fact, this jade slip didn't contain any earth-shattering secret techniques. Instead, it contained all the techniques to use spells, as well as the cultivation experience of the art of Sinu. Nevertheless, Mo Yaoqing was indeed a genius. Simple spells, after being explained by her, became more powerful. She made some subtle modifications, but they practically changed the appearance of some spells and greatly increased their power. Among them, the cultivation experience of the art of Sinu made Mo Tiange eagerly throw herself into it. Her main cultivation technique was the Sinu art of the origin modified by Zhong Muling, but it was a combination of Taiyuan record and the art of Sinu. There was no difference in the details between the two, so Mo Yaoqing's cultivation experience was completely applicable to Mo Tiange. In addition, there were also some things Mo Yaoqing casually recorded in the jade slip, such as the modification of some pill recipes, the concept of refining magic weapons, the methods of concocting medicinal pills, refining tools, formations, restrictions, and so on. Mo Tiange could see that these things were just her usual thoughts. Some of them had been tested, but some of them were just ideas. However, to be able to conceive pill recipes and a completely new method of refining magic weapons, she could definitely be regarded as a grandmaster, especially since there were so many aspects involved. After learning that Mo Yaoqing was such an all-rounder, Mo Tiange was both amazed and puzzled at the same time. With Mo Yaoqing's talent, she was almost not inferior to Wanderer Ziwei. So why was her original sect only treating her as an excellent dual cultivation candidate instead of cultivating her for the future? Mo Yaoqing's notes at the back of the jade slip solved her doubts. I stepped onto the path of immortality at the age of 5, built my foundation at the age of 20, formed my gold core at 100, and entered the nascent soul realm at 500. Outsiders don't know the hardships I went through, but it's a pity that I'm a woman with a pure Yin constitution. Otherwise, how could I wander from place to place, wander in a foreign land, and never be able to return to my homeland? As a woman, the path of immortality isn't easy. I think I'm talented and intelligent, but because I have a pure Yin constitution, I've always been regarded as a human furnace. I carefully investigated the reason. It's probably because most people on the path of immortality are men. Over time, people in the world were blinded by a single leaf and didn't recognize women's talents. This confession was filled with sighs of not being able to appreciate a woman's talent. Mo Tiange also sighed when she read it. In all fairness, although she also felt she was talented and intelligent, compared to Mo Yaoqing, she had no choice but to look up to her. There were too many things she had to learn from the records in this jade slip. Not to mention in the future, the current her definitely couldn't compare to Mo Yaoqing. Whether it was Mo Yaoqing or that Wanderer Ziwei, both made her realize that there were such geniuses in this world. She still had a long way to go, so she mustn't be complacent. The back of the notes also recorded some of Mo Yaoqing's private affairs. I met a male cultivator in Yunzhong. His name was Zhong Muling. He unexpectedly had a pure neutral constitution, and his nature was even rarer. He was indeed someone worth befriending. I met a man with a pure Yang constitution. He was indeed a good match. However, this person was arrogant and I didn't like him, so I dropped the matter. Later on she wrote, unable to reach the nascent soul realm for a long time, I was extremely anxious. My enemies increased day by day. If I didn't make a realm breakthrough soon, it would be difficult for me to protect my body. After thinking for several days, I finally came up with a plan. This plan was the worst plan. Once I used it, I would feel ashamed to face Zhong Muling. However, I couldn't find a better plan for the time being. The man she mentioned should be Yuan Bao, but her tone sounded like she didn't care at all. Presumably, a genius like Mo Yaoqing was also very arrogant and disdained the path of dual cultivation. However, what method did she mention? Would she feel ashamed to face Zhong Muling? As Mo Tiange read on, she finally understood. Theoretically, dual cultivation with a pure Yang constitution is more effective, but I really didn't like that Taoist Yuan Bao. However, Zhong Muling's nature was sincere, so I liked him very much. He also had a pure neutral constitution. Although dual cultivation wasn't as good as a pure Yang constitution, it wasn't bad either. Although I was on good terms with Zhong Muling, this matter was really unfair to him. It was hard for me to say it, so I used the soul-frightening bell to confuse him. In the end, dual cultivation became a matter. Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. As it turned out, Zhong Muling was actually this ancestor of Mo Yaoqing's. Not only was her intelligence not inferior to a man's, but her methods and courage were also comparable to a man's. On one hand, Mo Tiange admired her, but on the other hand, she felt that this matter was indeed not very kind. How could Zhong Muling be willing? Zhong Muling isn't a fickle person. What I did this time wasn't honorable enough, so I expected he'd definitely break off our friendship after he woke up. Unexpectedly, although Zhong Muling wasn't very happy, he didn't turn hostile towards me. He said I'd treated him well in the past, so he decided to let this matter go. I felt guilty, so after thinking about it, I decided to leave Yunzhong. After that, she talked about everything that happened in Linhai. She set up the transporting formation, went to Kunwu to rescue a group of women, who were used as human furnaces, established Bishuan Court, and called herself Primordial Lady Bishui. Mo Tiange found some messy accounts interspersed in the story. After one night of being husband and wife, I unexpectedly became pregnant. I wholeheartedly wanted to cultivate to become an immortal, so I originally shouldn't have kept him. However, I couldn't bear it, so out of consideration for his father, I finally gave birth to him. Unfortunately, this child didn't have spiritual roots, and was destined to have no fate with me, so I could only leave him in the secular world. There were many other things in between. Mo Tiange found another passage at the end. I'm now in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. I don't have much time left in my lifespan, so I already have no hope of making a realm breakthrough. Thinking about how I gave birth to a child in the past, I've had many descendants in the past several hundred years, but there are only a few people who have spiritual roots. Moreover, all of them have wasted spiritual roots, so it's inconvenient for me to lead them on the path to immortality. There are also 2 or 3 people with pure Yin constitution, but none of them have spiritual roots. Now that I'm about to pass away, the art of Sunu will eventually be lost, so I have no choice but to take a trip to the secular world and seal a strand of my divine sense. If there are descendants with pure Yin constitution, I'll pass on the art of Sunu. Chapter 216. After reading all the records, Mo Tiange didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Not only was her ancestor not inferior to men in intelligence, but she was also more decisive and courageous than men in handling things. She recalled the few days they spent together in Zhong Muling's virtual sky world. Zhong Muling was serious in speech and manner, but it turned out he used to have such a temperament. Facing Mo Yaoqing, he was no match for her in terms of momentum. Even the matter of dual cultivation was schemed against. No wonder there didn't seem to be any emotional disputes between Zhong Muling and Mo Yaoqing. As it turned out, this was the origin of the Mo family's inheritance of several thousand years. After sealing her divine sense in the Mo family's ancestral hall, Mo Yaoqing returned to Linhai. She also left her last words, entrusting the younger generation of Bishuan court to take care of her descendants. However, when she was in the Mo family's village, Mo Tiange never saw the disciples sent by Bishuan court. Perhaps Bishuan court never found a person with spiritual roots who could be accepted as a disciple. So as time passed, the inheritors of the later generations no longer paid attention to them. It was also possible that they only came once every 20 or 30 years, or even longer. However, from the time she was born until she left, it was only a short 10 years. Mo Tiange sighed when she read this. She had a father who was a core formation cultivator, a great ancestor who occasionally went to Jin to see his descendants, and a great-grandmother who entrusted her descendants to take care of them. But she ended up walking on the path to immortality. It could only be said that she was really not a lucky person. However, on the other hand, if she hadn't wandered from place to place for more than 10 years, she might not have the temperament she had today. She might be as proud and complacent as Hua Yilin, or as weak and timid as Tang Shun. Suffering itself wasn't a beautiful memory, but sometimes, people still had to be grateful for some things that suffering brought, such as a strong heart and broad knowledge. After learning about Mo Yaoqing's life, Mo Tiange began to study some fragmentary things she recorded. In terms of formations, she made considerable progress by comparing them with Xuanji formation book. Although there were many books in the virtual sky world, there were too many books that surpassed her realm, so she couldn't understand many of them. The environment of the distant past era was also different from today's, so she couldn't copy them. Xuanji formation book and Mo Yaoqing's records happened to make up for this shortcoming. In addition, Mo Tiange noticed that there was a paragraph in Mo Yaoqing's notes. A magic treasure, a treasure that contains magic power. Cultivation affects a cultivator's advancement, but magic treasures represent a cultivator's strongest battle strength. Especially for core formation cultivators, the strength of their natal magic treasures almost determines the strength of their combat abilities. Cultivators in the core formation realm, and above, could refine their natal magic treasures. They would add their natal blood essence, and refine it in their dantian, continuously nourishing it with their blood essence. Over time, the magic treasure would even become sentient. Simply put, a natal magic treasure was a magic treasure that was closely related to the cultivator. The longer it was nurtured, the greater its power would be. If the natal magic treasure was damaged, the cultivator would also be damaged. I've wandered the world all my life, from Yunzhong to the celestial pole. I don't know how many opponents I've met, and how many magic treasures I've seen. Because of this, I've come up with several types of magic treasures for future disciples to choose as their natal magic treasures. Mo Tiange's spirit was lifted, and she continued to read. In the past, when I was in Yunzhong's heavenly treasure pavilion, I once saw a legend recorded in ancient times. In the legend, the mother of creation had a magic treasure called the Mountain and River Map. This map is actually a huge magic formation. If you're trapped inside, it'll be like the changes of the four symbols. If you think of a mountain, it'll be a mountain. If you think of water, it'll be water. If you think of the future, it'll be forward. If you think of the future, it'll be back. I've thought about it for a long time, and came up with several types of magic treasures. Today, I can try them out one by one. There were only 5 types of magic treasures, namely killing, protecting, confusing, trapping, and auxiliary. The killing type was used to attack. The protecting type was used to defend. The confusing type could make one lose their mind. The trapping type was used as a formation. The auxiliary type was used to break formations or clear one's mind. The auxiliary type was used to assist. The shuttle of flying Apsara was an offensive magic tool. Although it also had the function of setting formations, it was a killing formation. The white silk handkerchief was a defensive magic tool. The enchanting lantern, although it had the word enchanting in it, was actually a trapping formation. The cloud-treading boots and the spirit-concealing pendant were auxiliary magic tools. Mo Tiange reckoned the mountain and river map Mo Yaoqing mentioned should be a combination of trapping and confusing, and it also had the effect of killing. This kind of magic treasure was the most difficult to guard against, because it was aimed at the weakness of a person's mental state. A brilliant confusing magic treasure could make people fall into its trap without them realizing it. If it was really like what Mo Yaoqing said, where one thought of mountains and rivers, one needed to have a very strong willpower to get rid of it. However, even a nascent soul cultivator's mental state wasn't perfect. 5 elements plate. This plate is actually a large formation plate with the following formation engraved on it. The advantage of this thing is that it can be used without using too much spiritual aura. But its disadvantage is that it's hard to deal with for people who know formations like the back of their hand. Black and white life and death chess. This thing is shaped like a chess piece. If you make a wrong move, you'll be killed. The materials needed are very expensive. The production method is as follows. Unfortunately, the confusing effect isn't strong, so it's difficult to reach the state where one thinks of mountains and rivers. Heaven and earth fan. The painting of mountains and rivers as the surface of the fan is actually a formation, but it can be made like this. If it can be made like this, it'll be very powerful. Unfortunately, the materials are too hard to find. Mo Tiange's gaze fell on this heaven and earth fan. Its main materials were clearly written. The handle is made from the bone of an 8th-rank spiritual beast and above, with 1,000-year-old chalcedony. The bone of a divine beast is the best, and the older the chalcedony, the better. The painting of the fan is made from a bewitching moonstone. She hastily went back to read it again. Yes, the main materials were clearly written, and it just so happened that she had the bone of a divine dragon and the bewitching moonstone. Mo Tiange didn't think much about her natal magic weapon before. She had a middle-stage nascent soul master, so after she formed her gold core, she could naturally get a lot of magic weapon formulas from her master. At that time she could just choose one. But if this heaven and earth fan was really as powerful as Mo Yaoqing said, it could basically be regarded as a top-grade magic weapon. Generally speaking, the natal magic weapons of core formation cultivators weren't very good, probably because they were limited by their abilities, and materials for magic weapons above the middle grade were too difficult to find. However, natal magic weapons were too important, and no cultivator was willing to wait until they were in the middle or late stage, or even the nascent soul realm to refine them. Compared to natal magic weapons, ordinary magic weapons were a bit inferior, even if they were 1 rank higher. Therefore, They would usually refine ordinary natal magic weapons as soon as they formed their gold cores, and slowly cultivate them with their blood essence over a long period of time. After a long time, the magic weapons would gradually become more powerful. But if the magic weapons they refined from the beginning were excellent, they would have a higher starting point than others, and would naturally become more powerful in the future. In addition, she was skilled in formations, so it would be best if she could use formations as magic weapons. After thinking for a while, she went to find Wei Haolan, who was studying ancient books. Sect Headway, do you have time? Wei Haolan looked up from the book and asked with a smile. Fellow Taoist Yi, do you need something? Emotinga said. I have something to ask. Wei Haolan looked at Xia Qing, who was concocting pills, and Tang Shun, who was concentrating on cultivating, then said, let's go downstairs. Emotinga nodded. Concocting pills and cultivating generally couldn't be disturbed, but the two elders were worried that no one would take care of them. If something happened, it would be troublesome to deal with them, so they let the four of them cultivate on the same floor. Usually, the four of them did their own things and didn't disturb each other. The two of them went to the second floor, found two praying mats at random, and sat down. Emotinga waved the jade slip in her hand. Sect Headway, may I ask if anyone has tried to refine the magic weapons recorded in the Patriarch's notes? Wei Haolan took the jade slip and immersed her divine sense into it. After a while, she answered, the Patriarch's notes can only be studied by the elders and the sect head. Some people have indeed tried to refine some of the magic weapons and medicinal pills recorded in it. I remember when I was young, a core formation elder tried to refine a purple gold gourd. Although he failed, it proved that it was possible to refine this treasure. What about this one? Emotinga asked. Has anyone refined this heaven and earth fan? Wei Haolan looked at it, then shook her head. Fellow Taoist Yi, this heaven and earth fan requires the bones of spiritual beasts in the 8th rank or above. After the Patriarch, only one nascent soul cultivator appeared in our Bichuan court. Where could we get the materials? That was true. Not to mention the bones of 8th rank spiritual beasts. Even a 1,000-year-old chalcedony is hard to find. Even if it occasionally appears, it'll sell for more than 10,000 spirit stones at the very least. Also, we don't know what this Qiyun stone is. I estimate the materials needed to refine this magic weapon would cost at least tens of thousands of spirit stones, as well as absolute good luck and super strong strength. At this point, Wei Haolan shook her head and sighed. Not to mention that we can't get them. Even if we did, we wouldn't refine a magic weapon we don't know if we can successfully refine. We're too short on materials. I see. Emotinga was a bit disappointed. If Bichuan Court had refined these magic weapons before, she would try to refine them. If she liked them, she would use them as her natal magic weapon. This magic weapon was too powerful. It could trap, confuse, and kill. It would be very difficult to find a more powerful magic weapon. Fellow Taoist Emo, do you want to refine this magic weapon? Wei Haolan asked. Emotinga nodded, then shook her head. After we go back this time, I'll enter closed-door meditation to advance to the core formation realm. If I succeed, I'll have to refine my natal magic weapon first. Originally, I saw how powerful this magic weapon was, so I was just considering it. I didn't have to refine it. Wei Haolan said, if it's fellow Taoist Yi, it'll be much more convenient than us. Your sect is a big cultivation group, so it naturally has more information and materials than us. Your master also has a rather high status, so if he lacks anything, he can order his disciples to slowly look for it. That's true, but the cost is really expensive, and the materials are too rare. Let's take a look first. After I return to the group, I'll report to my master and see if it's feasible. Upon hearing what Emotinga said, Wei Haolan said with a stern expression, Fellow Taoist Yi, you're now Bichuan Court's guest elder, so you can naturally read this notebook. However, many of the things in it are Bichuan Court's secrets, so I hope you won't leak them. Emotinga said, rest assured, Sect Headway. I won't take out the notebook. I'll just let my master evaluate the formula of this magic weapon. Wei Haolan hesitated for a moment, but eventually nodded. That's fine. In any case, this magic weapon formula was just sitting there in Bishuan court. No one would refine it. Emotinga smiled then asked, Sect Head Wei, how are your injuries? Wei Haolan said, they're the same as before. Although my cultivation level is preserved, my Dantian was seriously injured, so I have to slow down my recovery. At this point, she sighed and said, in any case, the two elders still have to spend a long time cultivating secret techniques, so I'll just take my time to heal. Fellow Daoisti, what about you? Are you feeling better? Wei Haolan had always been very concerned about Emotinga's injuries. Emotinga knew Wei Haolan was now a guest elder, and Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao told Wei Haolan that she'd be assisting Bishuan court in its reconstruction. So Wei Haolan was very concerned about her injuries. However, no matter what the reason was, it was always good to have someone care about her. I'm fine, Emotinga answered. The dead aura I'm suffering from isn't much, so it didn't harm my foundation. However, the Dantian real fire of a foundation building cultivator is too weak for this dead aura. According to my estimation, it might take me 7 or 8 years, or even 10 years to completely refine it. Wei Haolan was silent for a while upon hearing Emotinga's answer. She then said, that being the case, let Junior Marshal Sister Xia concoct some medicinal pills for you. Maybe it'll be a bit faster. Emotinga shook her head. I don't lack medicinal pills, so Sect Head Wei doesn't need to worry. Although there were a lot of medicinal pills stored in the pagoda, in the end, pill concocting required fresh spiritual plants, so there weren't many medicinal pills that could be concocted. Since she was now a guest elder of Bishuan court, she also had to think about Bishuan court. She really didn't need to fight with Wei Haolan and Tang Shun over these medicinal pills. Chapter 217. Every day, she would heal her injuries, cultivate, and study the notes Emo Yaoqing left behind. Emotinga only felt that time flew by. In the blink of an eye, several years had passed just like that. She had a temperament that could endure loneliness. She had also been in closed-door meditation for several years before. So now that she was immersed in Emo Yaoqing's cultivation experiences, she didn't find it difficult at all. In any case, she just considered it closed-door meditation. It was common for foundation-building cultivators to be in closed-door meditation for several years, or even dozens of years. Wei Haolan was also like this. She spent most of her time healing and refining the dead aura. Occasionally, she chatted with Emotinga about some matters related to the group, which allowed Emotinga to learn more about Bishuan court's situation. Presumably, Wei Haolan also did this deliberately. She shouldered the heavy responsibility of rebuilding Bishuan court, but Xia Qing and Tang Shun couldn't share this responsibility with her. Emotinga, on the other hand, was appointed by the two elders to help her rebuild the group in the future, so she had to have a rough understanding of the group's situation. Xia Qing also sometimes talked about pill concocting with her. She was a simple-minded person, so even in this kind of situation, she was still thinking about pill concocting. As for Tang Shun, he obviously didn't have enough patience. His cultivation level was only in the early stage of the foundation building realm, and he wasn't very old, so presumably, he spent very little time in closed-door meditation after building his foundation. However, he also knew how to be patient because of his great hatred. In the beginning, he often couldn't concentrate on cultivating, but gradually, he was able to meditate for several days, or even several months like them. As for Ren Yufeng, who was outside the pagoda, sometimes he didn't show up for a long time, so long that they thought he'd lost his patience. But then he suddenly appeared. In the beginning, Ren Yufeng was still interested in showing off to the people inside the pagoda, but they never paid attention to him. Later he got tired of it, and simply occupied Bishuan court's monastery, playing the game of founding a sect. He captured the individual cultivators in the vicinity, and some former Bishuan court cultivators, called it Divine Dragon Sect, and proclaimed himself the sect head. For the sake of survival, these cultivators all became yes-men. This greatly satisfied Ren Yufeng, so he simply became the sect head of Divine Dragon Sect. He only sent 2 cultivators to guard the entrance of the Tao Achieving Pagoda, and no longer paid attention to them. Mo Tiange remembered that when Ren Yufeng first gathered people outside the Tao Achieving Pagoda to hold the so-called sect-establishing ceremony, Wei Haolan looked at the crowd below with tears in her eyes. She saw her loved ones among these people. Their figures were thin and frail, their bodies covered in scars. They must have suffered great torment looking like walking corpses. She once asked Wei Haolan roughly how many Bishuan court cultivators were still alive. Wei Haolan was silent for a long time. In the end, she said, "Perhaps there are still a lot of people alive, but after being tortured like this, I'm afraid they don't even have the least bit of self-respect left. It's not difficult to rebuild the sect and call back the disciples, but it's very difficult to restore the confidence they once had as cultivators." Mo Tiange was speechless. She didn't have any management skills, so she couldn't help. Year after year, time flowed like water. Finally, 10 years later, Mo Tiange completely dissolved all the dead aura and returned to her peak state. She then devoted herself wholeheartedly to cultivating. The teleportation formation on the 4th floor was still closed, and there was no news from the 2 elders. The 4 of them had no choice but to wait. After another 5 years, with the support of Xiaqing's medicinal pills, Tang Xin finally advanced to the middle stage of the foundation building realm, bringing a trace of joy to the Tao Achieving Pagoda that had been dull for more than 10 years. To encourage everyone, Wei Haolan suggested they take a day off to celebrate with Tang Xin. However, they'd been locked up in the pagoda for more than 10 years, so they couldn't hold any banquets. Fortunately, Wei Haolan left some good wine in her Qianquan bag, so they could use it to make up for the occasion. "Junior Marshal Brother Tang, it's your happy occasion, so you should drink a bit more today." Wei Haolan urged him to drink with a smile. Xiaqing also temporarily put aside pill concocting and nodded repeatedly. "That's right. Senior Marshal Brother Tang, it's only been more than 10 years since you advanced to the middle stage, right? Advancing to the middle stage in 30 years is really amazing." Tang Xin touched his nose somewhat embarrassedly and said, "If I wasn't locked up in the pagoda and could only restrain my thoughts, I wouldn't have advanced so quickly. Besides, Junior Marshal Sister Xia has been concocting medicinal pills for me. Fellow Taoist Yi has been explaining her experiences to me, and Senior Marshal Sister Sect Head has often comforted me. It's all thanks to all of you that I can advance so quickly." After more than 10 years of devoted cultivation, although he was still thin-skinned, he no longer blushed easily, and his temperament also became a lot calmer. Wei Haolan said with a smile, "This is all we can do. You still have to rely on yourself to cultivate. Junior Marshal Brother Tang, you're not even 60 years old yet, but you're already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. You're indeed one of the best talents in our Bishuan court." Tang Xin smiled, but his expression soon turned gloomy again. "Bishuan court only has us left." Wei Haolan and Xiaqing were both silent upon hearing what he said. Outside the Tao Achieving Pagoda, cultivators occasionally came and went, but they were no longer Bishuan court disciples. Soon, however, Wei Haolan forced a smile and said, "What's there to be afraid of? When the 2 elders come out of closed-door meditation and eliminate that devil cultivator, we can naturally rebuild the group. Besides, many of the original disciples are still here. We can just call them back when the time comes." Tang Xin also realized he shouldn't have mentioned this matter, so he also smiled and chimed in, Right. What Senior Marshal Sister Sect Head said is right. We can just go out and rebuild the group. Come, let's drink." As he said that, Tang Xin gulped down a cup of wine. Unexpectedly, he didn't know how to drink, and this wine was quite spicy, so his expression immediately became distorted, looking extremely wonderful. Upon seeing his expression, the 3 women present all laughed. This was Bishuan Court's most popular handsome man, young Master Tang Xin. He was always graceful, gentle, and refined. When had he ever lost his composure like this? "Junior Marshal Brother Tang, if you can't drink, just drink a little less. Come, wipe your mouth." Wei Haolan handed him a towel, but she still couldn't help but look at him with a smile. She said he was a lot calmer now, but he still couldn't help but blush. With great difficulty, Tang Shen finally managed to swallow the wine. He took the towel then coughed while wiping the spilled wine. I've made senior martial sisters and junior martial sisters laugh at me. Xia Qing waved her hand. Senior martial brother Tang, this is nothing. Previously, I secretly smeared 3 leaves golden sunflower powder on senior martial sister Hua's medicinal pills. Senior martial sister Hua's expression was truly wonderful. 3-leafed golden sunflower was a kind of commonly seen spiritual medicine. It didn't have much use, but it was very spicy. Just a little bit of it would make people who couldn't eat spicy food feel like their mouths were on fire. Mo Tiange once used it as a seasoning, so she was very clear about it. Upon hearing what Xia Qing said, Mo Tiange asked, "Is the senior martial sister Hua you're talking about that fellow Taoist Hua Yilin?" "Yes," Xia Qing said with a disdainful expression. "I don't like senior martial sister Hua. She always likes to put on airs, and even gives me that attitude. She never thought that her medicinal pills were in my hands." At this point, Xia Qing's expression turned gloomy. In the past, I wasn't sensible and always thought senior martial sister Hua was hateful, so I wanted to embarrass her whenever I had the chance. In fact, senior martial sister Hua didn't do anything bad. She was just a bit arrogant and despotic. I wonder how she's doing now. The atmosphere once again turned silent. Even though they were forcing themselves to smile, they still remembered their sorrowful past from time to time. "Let's not talk about this." This time, it was Tang Shen who spoke. He turned towards Wei Haolan. "Senior martial sister sect head, are your injuries healed?" Wei Haolan nodded with a smile. "They're almost healed. The dead aura has been dissolved. In the future, as long as I slowly meditate and recuperate, my injuries will naturally heal." Xia Qing said, "Senior martial sister sect head, during this period of time, I'll concoct another batch of healing medicinal pills for you. You mustn't be reluctant to take them. If you're not well, Bishuang Court is not well. You have to cherish yourself." "Yes." Tang Shen took over. "In the past, I wasn't sensible and always caused trouble for senior martial sister sect head. In the future, I'll definitely cultivate diligently." Wei Haolan smiled. Her smile was filled with joy. "You're all sensible now. That's good." Her gaze then shifted towards Mo Tiange, who had been silent all this time. "Fellow Taoist Yi, these past few years, thanks to you often teaching junior martial brother Tang, I'm afraid junior martial sister Xia, and I don't have any hope of advancing to the core formation realm. So we can only count on you and junior martial brother Tang." Mo Tiange showed a faint smile. "It's nothing. I'm now Bishuang Court's guest elder, so I naturally have to do my part." In fact, Tang Shen could be considered quite intelligent. He also had a pure yang constitution and decent spiritual roots. In the past, perhaps because of his flawed character, he was always unable to meditate and cultivate. In the past 10-odd years, he had to meditate even if he didn't want to. Moreover, he was stimulated by his great hatred, so he constantly reminded himself to be strong, so he grew very fast. Mo Tiange reckoned that even if he couldn't form his nascent soul, forming his core shouldn't be a problem. "Yes, fellow Taoist Yi is now one of us." Xia Qing interrupted. "Therefore, fellow Taoist Yi, you mustn't hide anything. We should discuss pill concocting issues more often." Xia Qing once again changed the topic to pill concocting out of habit, causing the other 3 people to laugh. Wei Haolan paused for a moment then said, "Since fellow Taoist Yi is one of us, wouldn't it be too distant for us to still call her fellow Taoist Yi?" "That's true," Xia Qing said. "But I seem to have heard the 2 elders call fellow Taoist Yi something before? It's been too long, so I can't remember." The corners of Mo Tiange's mouth curved into a smile. "My original surname was Mo, and my name was Tiange." "Oh, right, it seems to be Tiange. Fellow Taoist Yi, why did you use a fake name?" "Oh no, let's just call her senior martial sister Mo from now on. Yi Xiaotian isn't a fake name." This was the first time she explained the problem of names to others. "Mo is my mother's surname, while my father's surname is Yi. Yi Xiaotian was the name my uncle gave me." "Yi," Mo Xia Qing thought for a moment. "Both are good. But since Emo Tienga is her original name, let's just call her Senior Marshal Sister Emo from now on, okay? It's hard to say who's older and who's younger. Yi Haolan knew Emo Tienga's background, so she said with a smile, Junior Marshal Sister Xia. In terms of cultivation level, you have to call me Senior Marshal Sister. In terms of age, you should count your years first. And I don't need to count my years. To you, I'm already an old woman. Senior Marshal Sister, you're only 100 years old. How are you old? Xia Qing spoke quickly. Right now, I think I'm 53. I also know Senior Marshal Brother Tang. You're older than me by 6 years? You should be 59 now, right? Tang Shen nodded with a smile. Senior Marshal Sister Emo, what about you? Emo Tienga said with a smile. In that case, you really have to call me Senior Marshal Sister. I'm 55 now, so I'm 2 years older than you. Ah. Xia Qing was astonished. Even Tang Shen's eyes widened. Since they were injured and hid inside the Dao Achieving Pagoda, Emo Tienga didn't need to hide her cultivation level anymore. Therefore, Xia Qing and Tang Shen already knew she was a late-stage foundation-building cultivator. But since the two elders and Wei Haolan didn't care, they didn't say anything. It was also because of this that Xia Qing called Emo Tienga Senior Marshal Sister, as if it was a matter of course. She was 55 now, and they had been hiding inside the Dao Achieving Pagoda for 16 years. Didn't that mean she was only 39 years old back then? A 39-year-old late-stage foundation-building cultivator. This was indeed astonishing. Tang Shen was the first to regain his train of thought. He said sincerely, It turns out fellow Taoist Yi is such a genius. I was really rude. Other people didn't know, but Emo Tienga understood the hidden meaning in his words. However, this matter was Tang Shen's misunderstanding. Back then, Emo Tienga rejected his dual cultivation proposal not because she thought his aptitude wasn't good enough for her, but because she didn't want to perform dual cultivation with him. Chapter 218. Emo Tienga didn't explain. In any case, the dual cultivation proposal had long been rejected, and she wouldn't have anything to do with Tang Shen in the future, so there was no need to explain. Tang Shen also didn't mention it. He just smiled and said, That being the case, I'd better call you Senior Marshal Sister. Senior Marshal Sister Emo is so young, but you already have such a high cultivation level. It's only right to call you Senior Marshal Sister. In the cultivation world, seniority wasn't determined by age. Only people who had a very close relationship, such as fellow disciples, would be determined by age. Even after their cultivation levels increased, they still addressed each other like that to show respect. They'd lived together in this pagoda for more than 10 years. Although they spent most of their time doing their own things, their relationship wasn't like ordinary people's. So they talked about age. Now that he learned Emo Tienga's cultivation level was so much higher than his, Tang Shen sincerely felt he should call her Senior Marshal Sister. Xia Qing said, In any case, I should call you Senior Marshal Sister. Senior Marshal Sister Emo, you're so awesome, so you have to take care of me in the future. Junior Marshal Sister Xia. Wei Haolan gave her a sidelong glance and also smiled. That's true. Fellow Taoist Yi is now a guest elder of Bishuan Court, so you have to take care of us. Emo Tienga waved her hand. Please don't laugh at me. I'm just relying on the shadow of my elders. Wei Haolan was about to speak, but the four of them suddenly felt a spiritual aura fluctuation. They stopped and turned to look at the transporting formation at the same time. The transporting formation flashed, and Elder Chingy's voice came. The four of you come up. Hearing the elder's voice again after 15 years, the four of them couldn't help but feel excited. Wei Haolan pressed her chest to calm her excitement and said, It seems the two elders have come out of closed-door meditation. Let's go up to see them. Of course, no one had any objections. The four of them put down their wine cups, stood up, and walked towards the transporting formation. During these 15 years, the transporting formation had been closed. Now that it was open, and they were summoned, the two elders must have come out of closed-door meditation. Standing on the transporting formation, there was a flash of light, and the four of them appeared on the 4th floor. Although they were eager to see the two elders, the three of them didn't dare to look up. They all knew the consequences of the two elders cultivating the blood prohibition secret technique. Although they had 15 years to prepare, seeing it with their own eyes was a different matter. Therefore, Imo Tienga was the first to see the two elders' appearances. The two elders were sitting side by side on the praying mats at the head of the table. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but they had put on their cloaks and veils. The veil and cloak not only blocked their vision, but also blocked their divine sense. The two elders' cultivation was higher than theirs, so they couldn't see their real appearances. Greetings to the two elders. Imo Tienga was the first to greet them. She could also be considered a member of Bishuan court now, so she no longer needed to call her senior. Hearing that there was nothing unusual in her voice, the other three raised their heads. Their eyes were filled with relief, but also sadness. The two elders must have been afraid of scaring them, so they covered their appearances. Greetings, elders. Wei Haolan took the lead and saluted. Elder Qingyi nodded slightly. You've worked hard these past 15 years. Her voice, however, was much more hoarse than before. Wei Haolan respectfully replied, compared to the two elders, this little bit of hard work is nothing at all. You're a good child, Elder Qingmiao said. Elder Qingmiao took over the conversation. Although her appearance couldn't be seen, her voice was obviously aged. You don't need to blame yourselves. This is a responsibility we must bear as elders of Bishuan court. Tang Shen lowered his head and secretly wiped the corners of his eyes. Upon seeing him, Elder Qingyi said, Shen, you've made a realm breakthrough? Yes. Tang Shen lowered his head. I'm sorry, elders. I was too immature before. Elder Qingyi chuckled softly. Child, you've finally grown up. If your great-grandmother in the underworld knew about this, she'd definitely be happy. Tang Shen was Elder Qingxi's beloved grandson. Ever since he was a child, he grew up in front of the three elders. The two elders also regarded him as their junior. Now that they saw Tang Shen's cultivation level had advanced, and he had also matured a lot, they felt very comforted. Tang Shen wiped his tears and answered with a low voice, yes. In the future, Shen will certainly cultivate diligently and won't disappoint the two elders and great-grandmother anymore. The two elders' gazes then shifted to the others. Elder Qingyi continued to ask, Haolan, Tienga, are your injuries healed? Yes, Wei Haolan answered. Wei Haolan answered, rest assured, Elder. My injuries are almost healed. Elder Imo already dissolved my dead aura 5 years ago. Oh. Elder Qingmiao looked at Imo Tienga and said, Tienga, come up and let us have a look. Yes. Imo Tienga answered, then walked forward. Elder Qingmiao stretched out her hand like lightning, grabbing Imo Tienga's wrist and pouring her spiritual aura into it. Imo Tienga only felt pain and numbness in her meridians. Elder Qingmiao's spiritual aura was stronger than she imagined. It seemed to have reached the peak of the core formation realm. However, her spiritual aura was very strange. There was a kind of hidden mania that made her feel very uneasy. She looked down and saw her bare hands. They were as dry as an old tree, deathly pale, and without any color of blood. They couldn't even be called hands anymore. Moreover, she remembered that when she first met this Elder Qingmiao 16 years ago, she still had a delicate and pretty face, and her charm was still there. Even though she didn't have deep feelings for her like Wei Haolan and the other two, Imo Tienga still felt a bit sad. Although this was a world where benefits were paramount, it wasn't completely ruthless. Elder Qingmiao quickly released her hands and said with relief, very good. Tienga, not only are your injuries healed, but your spiritual aura is also much purer than before. Presumably, you've been very diligent these past dozen years. Imo Tienga retreated. Elders, you've contributed a lot. Since Junior has received your favor, I should also do something for Bishuan court. If you can think that way, we really didn't misjudge you. Elder Qingyi nodded with a smile. All right, I called you here for 2 reasons. First, we've finished practicing the blood prohibition secret technique, and we're officially out of closed-door meditation today. Second, this isn't enough to deal with that devil cultivator. We still need to prepare some things. Elder, Wei Haolan said. If you need to prepare anything, just tell us. We'll definitely do it seriously. We need to prepare 2 things, Elder Qingyi said calmly. First, that devil cultivator's dead aura is really powerful. If you get touched by it, you probably won't be able to hold on. We searched for a long time, and finally found a kind of talisman that can guard against this kind of dead aura. Therefore, in the following time, you need to put aside everything else and draw this kind of talisman. The more the better. Elder, Xiaqing said. We don't know how to draw talismans. How can we learn it in a short time? Then you'll learn until you can draw it. Elder Qingyi said without hesitation. As for the second thing, it's a magic weapon. You won't be able to help us with this. So only junior martial sister Qingmiao and I can refine it. None of them was a refining master. Refining tools was different from drawing talismans. No matter how lacking talisman paper and other materials were, they were still easy to obtain. Besides, the 7th floor of the Dao Achieving Pagoda was where Bishuan Court stored their treasures for several thousand years. The materials for refining tools, on the other hand, were much more precious, especially rare materials for magic weapons. They simply couldn't be wasted like this. Not bad. Elder Qingmiao passed her a jade slip. How long later? Go to the 7th floor and get the talisman paper and brush you need. Draw according to this. No matter how long it takes, you have to draw at least several hundred talismans. That way, we'll be able to deal with that devil cultivator. Yes, Wei Haolan answered. However, she hesitated for a moment and said, Elders, can you hold on? Cultivating the second half of the blood prohibition secret technique meant death, but she didn't know how long it would take for her to die. Elder Qingyi said faintly, rest assured. We two old women won't dare to die until we get rid of any future troubles for you. Wei Haolan's gaze wavered, but she didn't dare to ask again. She just lowered her head and answered, yes. Tienga. Mo Tienga stepped forward. I'm here. Go with Haolan. Your pill concocting skills are outstanding. If there's any medicinal pills that might be helpful, just take the materials and refine them. Mo Tienga paused for a moment, then cupped her hands. I understand. This was a way of expressing their trust in her. Not only did they let her enter the group's treasury, but they also let her take whatever she wanted. If she wasn't a trusted disciple, they wouldn't do this at all. Mo Tienga sighed inwardly. She felt her weakness had been found. She didn't think she was a kind person, but if someone treated her well, she'd want to repay them. The two elders treated her so well. How could she repay them? Not only was she determined to be their guest elder, but if she succeeded in her cultivation, she'd also have to take care of them often. All right, you two go back first. That's all. Yes. The four of them responded in unison. Xiaqing and Tang Shun went back to the 3rd floor, while Mo Tienga and Wei Haolan went to the 7th floor. Influenced by the two elders, the two of them didn't say a word on the way. When they reached the 7th floor, Wei Haolan opened the restriction and said, Elder Mo, over there is the spiritual panacea area. You can take whatever you want, and come back here to register. Okay. Mo Tienga looked around then nodded. 16 years ago, when they first hid inside the pagoda, the two elders brought her and Tang Shen up to the 7th floor. At that time, the two elders gave them a lot of medicinal pills and bestowed magic weapons to Tang Shen and Xiaqing. Because they learned about her life experience, they also very generously gave her Mo Yaoqing's personal notes. Although the notes didn't seem as precious as the magic weapons, Wei Haolan said only the sect head and elders could read the patriarch's notes. Being willing to give them to her was already a huge favor. Moreover, the notes were more important to her than any magic weapons. Although the two elders treated her like this, because they hoped she could help Wei Haolan rebuild Bishuan Court, kindness was kindness. Since she accepted it, she should repay them a little. Mo Tienga took a deep breath and quickly picked dozens of spiritual panaceas. She then found Wei Haolan and said, Sect head, I'm done. Oh. Wei Haolan was rummaging among the cinnabars and other things. Eventually, she found several jars of beast blood. Let's go. We can go down after we record them. Mo Tienga followed Wei Haolan to the altar table. She took out the register and recorded, but Mo Tienga raised her head to look at Mo Yaoqing's statue. Her great-grandmother had a rough life, But she had always been strong and unyielding, proud and self-reliant. If she knew that the sect she established was almost destroyed by a cultivator in the foundation-building realm, who practiced evil methods, she would definitely be very angry, wouldn't she? However, while she was angry, she must also be very gratified. Although her disciples weren't as talented as her, they didn't lose her lofty and unyielding character. As long as her lofty character remained, Bichuan Court could still be rebuilt. Elder Mo, upon hearing Wei Haolan's voice, Mo Tiange regained her train of thought. What's wrong? Are you confident? Wei Haolan didn't look at her. Instead, she was fiddling with the jade slip in her hand. No, Mo Tiange answered honestly in front of Wei Haolan. I like to take matters into my own hands. But this time, I'm not capable of doing it. I'm not confident at all. However, it doesn't matter if we're not confident. It's fine as long as the two elders are confident. Correct. Wei Haolan also raised her head to look at the statue. She then knelt down softly. Patriarch, please bless Bichuan Court. We'll kill our enemies and take back our monastery. Chapter 219. Inside the Tao Achieving Pagoda, it was once again busy. The two elders were still in closed-door meditation, refining magic weapons. The four juniors were either concocting medicinal pills, healing injuries, or drawing talismans. Wei Haolan's injuries hadn't completely healed, and Xiaqing wasn't good at other things. Seeing this, Mo Tiange taught Xiaqing some special medicinal pill concocting techniques, while she and Tang Shen took on talisman making. Now that they had a definite goal, the atmosphere inside the Tao Achieving Pagoda was tense, but it was also full of hope. The talismans the two elders talked about were high-grade talismans. Foundation-building cultivators could draw them, but they needed a long time to practice. The talisman paper and talisman water needed to make these talismans all needed special materials. To reduce the consumption of materials, Mo Tiange and Tang Shen both started practicing with low-grade talismans. Mo Tiange really didn't have any talent in talisman making. She was only talented in formations, but her pill concocting skills were so-so. Talisman making, on the other hand, was really out of talent. However, she had to draw talismans, so she had to immerse herself in practicing. Fortunately, Tang Shen's talent in talisman making was unexpectedly good, relieving her a lot of pressure. The fourth floor of the Tao Achieving Pagoda was closed again. The two elders concentrated on refining magic weapons. Wei Haolan meditated to heal her injuries. Xiaqing immersed herself in concocting medicinal pills, and Mo Tiange and Tang Shen focused on drawing talismans. Another 4 years went by as he prepared for this. In fact, Wei Haolan's injuries healed in the 3rd year, and Xiaqing also joined the ranks of talisman making in the 2nd year. 3 years later, Tang Shen finally succeeded in making this poison-resisting talisman. The two elders finally came out of their closed-door meditation after 4 years. The 6 people gathered again. Elder, is the magic weapon finished? Yes. Elder Qingyi's hoarse voice carried a hint of joy. After several failures, the magic weapon to deal with that devil cultivator is finally finished. The 4 juniors smiled at the same time. They had been trapped in this Tao Achieving Pagoda for 20 years, and they finally had a chance to leave. Although Mo Tiange didn't look too excited, she was very happy inside. This time, she only came out to experience the world for the sake of tempering her mental state. She didn't expect it would take her more than 20 years. She didn't know how Xianqing School was doing after she left for more than 20 years. Was that cheap master of hers still an unrefined old man? Had Jinji already built his foundation? Was everything safe and sound in her little cave residence? Thinking up to this point, she wished she could grow a pair of wings, directly cross demonic mountain range, and fly back to Xianqing School. The Tao Attainment Pagoda, which had been closed for 20 years, was finally open. The 2 so-called Divine Dragon sect disciples guarding outside the pagoda were chatting happily as usual. They were sent to guard the Tao Achieving Pagoda, but they didn't have much to do for more than 10 years, so they'd long forgotten Ren Yufeng's instructions. Every day they chatted and talked nonsense, drank and gambled. When the Tao Attainment Pagoda's original transfer array lit up, Two gamblers were still rolling the dice to bet on the ownership of this month's spirit stones. A group of 6 people appeared on the transporting formation. The 2 core formation elders smiled coldly. Elder Qingmiao waved her hand, causing a powerful spiritual aura pressure to cover them. The 2 low-level cultivators raised their heads in panic, and only then did they see the 6 people on the teleportation array. For a moment, their mouths were wide open, and they were speechless. They didn't have time to speak. Under the pressure, the 2 of them opened their eyes wide and blood flowed out of their 7 orifices. They silently fell to the ground. Elder Qingmiao humphed coldly. It's really shameful to send such a person to stand guard. Elder Qingyi said. Don't worry about them. We'll do our own thing. Xia Qing, Shen, you 2 go gather the original Bishuan court disciples and inform them that we're out. If other individual cultivators surrender, we won't make things difficult for them. But if they're stubborn, kill them on the spot. Yes. Xia Qing and Tang Shen accepted the order. Haolan Tiange, open the Great Mountain Protecting Formation. We mustn't let that devil cultivator escape. Yes. Elder Qingyi waved her hand. All right, let's split up. When you're done, gather in the conference hall. The 4 of them split into 2 groups and left after receiving the order. Bishuan Court's Great Mountain Protecting Formation was also set up by Mo Yaoqing years ago. With her exceptional aptitude, this Great Mountain Protecting Formation was extremely powerful. However, 20 years ago, Shangguan Yunhao harbored evil intentions. He colluded with Ren Yufeng and secretly closed the Great Mountain Protecting Formation, causing it to become useless. The 2 elders had long made a plan. On one hand, they'd gather the original disciples to kill Ren Yufeng. On the other hand, they'd open the Great Mountain Protecting Formation to hinder Ren Yufeng. By doing these 2 things well, the 2 of them would have more than an 80% chance of killing Ren Yufeng. Mo Tiange followed Wei Haolan and flew towards the Great Mountain Protecting Formation. They encountered many low-level disciples on the way, but the 2 of them ignored them all. Wei Haolan only stopped when they were far away from Bishuan Court's pavilions and saw a towering watchtower. Elder Mo, please lend me a hand. Mo Tiange nodded. The Great Mountain Protecting Formation was huge, so opening it by herself would inevitably be too much for her. Ren Yufeng had long been possessed by the devil. Even though he created the so-called Divine Dragon sect, it was nothing more than a secular world bandit occupying a mountain and acting like a king. It basically didn't look like a cultivation group at all. He also didn't understand the purpose of this Great Mountain Protecting Formation. Now there was actually no one inside the watchtower. Mo Tiange's attainments and formations were incomparable to cultivators in the same realm as her. Wei Haolan took out the formation blueprint, and the 2 of them repaired it one by one according to the blueprint. After spending half a day, they finally finished repairing the damaged parts. Right now, they both sensed spiritual aura fluctuations coming from inside Bishuan Court. The 2 of them must have started fighting against Ren Yufeng. The 2 of them were a bit worried. After sensing with rapt attention for a while, Mo Tiange said, the 2 elders should be fine. The dead aura in this spiritual aura fluctuation isn't strong. Presumably, the 2 elders suppressed it. Wei Haolan looked at her with a bit of astonishment then nodded. Bishuan Court had a circumference of several hundred miles, and their current location was also several hundred miles away from the inner part of Bishuan Court. Mo Tiange's divine sense must have been very strong to be able to sense it. Wei Haolan thought to herself that the 2 elders indeed had extraordinary foresight. This elder Mo was so young, but she already had this kind of ability. Presumably, she'd advance to the core formation realm soon. In that case, although this elder Mo wouldn't stay in Linhai for long, she'd definitely take care of Bishuan Court if she had spare energy in the future. The 2 of them had their own thoughts as they buried themselves in replenishing the spirit stones. The operation of this Great Mountain Protecting Formation required a lot of spirit stones. These past few years, the formation had been in a half-useless state, so the spirit stones had long been taken away. Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan busied themselves for a long time before they finally replenished all the spirit stones. Before long, Wei Haolan activated the Great Mountain Protecting Formation. A loud buzzing sound came from inside the watchtower, and a white light shone, illuminating the entire watchtower in an instant. Following this sound, a layer of misty fog appeared above Bichuan Court. This fog became thicker and thicker, gradually forming a defensive barrier. Bichuan Court's great mountain protecting formation had been completely activated. Everyone inside the formation was under its protection. At the same time, it also closed all the entrances and exits. Upon seeing that the great formation had been activated, Wei Haolan said, "Elder Mo, let's go and help." Mo Tiange nodded. Aside from killing Ren Yufeng, there were too many things they needed to do. Although Xia Qing and Tang Shun were a lot stronger than they were 20 years ago, no one knew whether accidents would happen or not. The two of them stepped onto their respective flying magic weapons and flew towards the inner part of Bichuan Court. At that moment, Bichuan Court was already in chaos. The spiritual aura fluctuations were getting stronger and stronger. Presumably, the two elders were fighting desperately against Ren Yufeng. As for the so-called Divine Dragon Sect disciples gathered by Ren Yufeng, not all of them were Bichuan Court's original disciples. There were also some individual cultivators among them. Some of them were even covered in dead aura like Ren Yufeng, but they weren't as strong. Upon seeing this, Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan each took out the poison-resisting talismans they prepared. Their divine senses sensed Xia Qing and Tang Shun's positions. Then they flew over together. In the distance, they saw Xia Qing and Tang Shun fighting against some people. There were 2 early-stage foundation-building disciples, and a dozen or so aura-refining disciples. All of them were covered in dead aura, so they were presumably Ren Yufeng's disciples and grand disciples. Senior Martial Sister Sect Head, Senior Martial Sister Mo, Xia Qing shouted when she saw the two of them. She and Tang Shun had poison-resisting talismans, so these people couldn't do anything to them. However, they weren't good at fights of magical powers, so they couldn't take down these people in a short time. Both Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan attacked. Wei Haolan summoned her cold ice mirror, releasing one ice spell after another from it. Mo Tiange, on the other hand, raised her hand. She controlled the shuttle of flying Apsara, as if it was her own arm, moving gracefully like a swimming dragon. All these years, she studied Mo Yaoqing's notes inside the Dao Achieving Pagoda, and learned a lot of fighting secrets, so her shuttle of flying Apsara was extremely sharp. Wherever the shuttle of flying Apsara went, corpses would fall one after another. The two foundation-building cultivators, on top of having to resist Wei Haolan's ice spell, also had to dodge the shuttle of flying Apsara, so they were flustered. Unfortunately, the 4 of them had poison-resisting talismans on them, so their dead aura couldn't break through them at all. Upon seeing this, Tang Shun and Xia Qing attacked the 2 cultivators with their magic tools without any hesitation. Before long, they killed them on the spot. After withdrawing their magic tools, Xia Qing came over and said, "Senior Martial Sisters, how are you?" "I'm fine." Wei Haolan looked around. Aside from the dozen or so devil cultivators they killed, there was no one else. "Why isn't there anyone else? Did you deliver the message?" Xia Qing answered dejectedly. This devil cultivator turned a lot of people into the same state as him. Their minds changed greatly, and they simply wouldn't listen to our advice. So we had no choice but to kill them. There were also some people who were still rational, but they were too weak, so we told them to hide first. Wei Haolan frowned. "Call them out. They're the clearest about the situation in the group now, so let them lead us to purge the devil cultivators." All right. Soon, they found the cultivators enslaved by Ren Yufeng. Among them were many former disciples of Bichuan Court, and when they saw Wei Haolan, many of them burst into tears. These people had been bullied by Ren Yufeng for 20 years. Now that they could finally take revenge, they were overjoyed, so they led the 4 of them everywhere to purge the devil cultivators assimilated by Ren Yufeng. The 4 of them, Xia Qing, Tang Shun, Wei Haolan and Mo Tiange, divided into 3 groups to purge the whole of Bichuan Court. The dead aura of these devil cultivators was far inferior to Ren Yufeng's, but they also had poison-resisting talismans on them. Soon, the devil cultivators scattered in Bichuan Court were completely purged. In the end, Everyone shifted their gaze towards the center of Bishuan Court, the place where the conference hall was located. The sky above the hall was firmly covered by the great mountain-protecting formation. Under the defensive cover, Ren Yufeng, who was covered in black aura, was confronting the two elders. Chapter 220. Ren Yufeng stared at the huge Bishuan court under his feet. There were several hundred scattered cultivators standing inside, but none of them had dead aura. His face couldn't help but twist as he glared at the two elders in front of him. "Old women, you ruined my plan." Elder Qingmiao stood with her whip in hand. Her face under her gauze hat was cold. "Devil cultivator, you're about to die, yet you still dare to be so arrogant." About to die? Ren Yufeng cast them a contemptuous glance, and a hostile look appeared on his face. "Even if I'm about to die, you'll still be my scapegoat." "Humph." Elder Qingyi stared at him coldly and lowered her hand that was covering her chest. "Since we can kill you, what's the big deal about us two old women dying? You killed my disciple and destroyed my Bishuan court. We martial sisters will properly settle this debt with you today." Ren Yufeng was arrogant. "Haha. That depends on whether you have the ability or not." Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao no longer said anything. The two of them glanced at each other, then began to cast spells. Their bodies emitted a bright red light that was as strong and gloomy as blood. The light became brighter, and the color of blood also became more and more intense. Gradually, the light on their bodies fused together. Upon seeing this, Ren Yufeng didn't dare to be careless. He'd been fighting with the two elders for a while. He thought he could defeat them quickly with his divine technique, but in the end, he was surprised to find that he was still at a disadvantage. Although his mind wasn't normal, he didn't become stupid. He immediately understood that the two elders must have cultivated some kind of secret technique in the Tao Achieving Pagoda, which was why their power could reach such a high level in just 20 years. Nevertheless, he didn't admit defeat. With the divine dragon's breath, he would soon advance to the nascent soul realm, then the deification realm, move unhindered in the human world, and ascend to become an immortal. What were these two old women? He could definitely kill them. With that thought in mind, the dead aura on Ren Yufeng's body surged, and his face under the black aura became increasingly ferocious. In an instant, the three of them moved. The two elders released their spiritual aura inside the red light, and Ren Yufeng's dead aura also surged towards them. The magic weapon the two elders refined for 4 years was called the Soul Restraining Whip. Ren Yufeng basically couldn't be considered a human anymore. He was as thin and withered as a skeleton. He basically didn't care about ordinary physical injuries, so they came up with this kind of magic weapon. This kind of magic weapon was specialized in attacking one's primordial spirit, so it was very difficult for Ren Yufeng to defend against it. His dead aura could protect his physical body, but it couldn't protect his primordial spirit. Just now he'd already suffered many losses. The two elders advanced and retreated, but they no longer attacked and defended like before. Instead, they completely gave up on defense and attacked with all their might. The fight in the air was intense, and the people watching from below couldn't take their eyes off it. The outcome of this battle concerned their future. Would they continue to be enslaved, or would they be able to live like humans? Of course, he would choose the latter, but now was not the time for them to choose. They could only wait for the outcome of this battle. The red light and the black gas grew brighter and brighter, until they could no longer see anything else. Many people were suffocated by the pressure. Wei Haolong glanced at them then shouted, "Junior Marshal Sister Xia, Junior Marshal Brother Tang, take them to a place farther away." Most of these people only had aura refining cultivation level, so how could they withstand this kind of pressure? Xia Qing and Tang Shen obeyed. However, before they could move, they saw Ren Yufeng, who was in the sky, suddenly stop. As if he heard Wei Haolong's voice, he turned around and rushed down. The two elders immediately followed him, but Ren Yufeng's speed was extremely fast, so they couldn't stop him for a while. Wei Haolong was shocked to see Mo Tiange in that direction, so she shouted, "Elder Mo?" Mo Tiange could already feel the surging dead aura. Without saying anything, she took out another poison-resisting talisman and stuck it on her body. The white silk handkerchief was summoned, which instantly expanded to the size of a mat and floated towards Ren Yufeng. When Ren Yufeng saw her, a trace of hatred appeared on his face covered by the black gas. He actually didn't look at anyone else and rushed towards her. Emotienga hastily retreated, with the white silk handkerchief in front of her and her cloud-treading boots. She heard faint sounds of wind and thunder. In an instant, she disappeared from her original spot and reappeared several dozen feet behind Ren Yufeng. This was the teleportation technique, engraved on the stone wall in Ziwei's Immortal's Cave. Wanderer Ziwei had perfected it, so foundation-building cultivators could also practice it. It was the only complete technique on the stone wall. In the past 20 years, Emotienga had been comprehending it for a long time, so she could finally use it. Ren Yufeng obviously hadn't seen it before, so he was stunned for a moment. Right at that moment, the two elders caught up to him. Their soul-confining whips attacked Ren Yufeng at the same time. Ren Yufeng couldn't concentrate and was hit head-on, causing him to scream miserably. After being hit, he turned around and glared fiercely at Emotienga. His dead aura surged. Nevertheless, the two elders didn't give him any time to rest. They used their secret technique at the same time. The soul-confining whips flashed with a blood-red light and struck him again. Ren Yufeng refused to accept his death. He gathered his dead aura and started to fight again. Emotienga quietly landed. When she saw that all the low-level cultivators around her had retreated, she heaved a sigh of relief. She signaled Wei Haolan, and the two of them also retreated a bit further. They were very clear about the cultivation levels of the two elders. They were already at the peak of the core formation realm. As for the dead aura on Ren Yufeng's body, it was obviously much denser than it was 20 years ago. This battle could be said to be the fiercest among cultivators below the nascent soul realm. It was no longer something cultivators at their level could meddle in. They couldn't even clearly see how the two sides fought. They could only see the dead aura and the red light entangling with each other. And the spiritual aura fluctuations were frighteningly strong. Emotienga couldn't help but recall the scene during Martial Uncle Xuanin's nascent soul ceremony. Martial Uncle Jinyang and her master joined hands to fight against Master Songfeng. Although their momentum wasn't as strong, the intensity of their fight was much higher. After all, nascent soul cultivators cherished their lives, but today they were fighting with their lives on the line. Look, Wei Haolan pointed at the sky. The three people who were fighting were emitting a bright red light, completely enveloping the black aura. Emotienga and Wei Haolan glanced at each other. Both of them were delighted. However, the black aura slowly spread and almost overwhelmed the red light. This battle was in a stalemate, causing Emotienga and Wei Haolan to tremble with fear. What if they lost? They didn't dare to think about the consequences. If they lost, the two elders would die, Bishuan Court wouldn't be able to be rebuilt, and they would experience another bloodbath. As she thought about this, Emotienga lowered her head to look at her hands. The dead aura on her body had already dissipated, so if the situation wasn't good, she could enter the virtual sky world to hide. However, they'd been in trouble together for 20 years, and she'd witnessed the two elders losing their lives. She didn't want this to be the end. "Elder!" Wei Haolan suddenly called out. Emotienga looked up and saw that the black aura in the sky was getting thicker and thicker, making her heart tighten. At the same time, she prepared herself. If the two elders really lost, she'd take Wei Haolan into the virtual sky world to hide for a while. However, just as the red light was being compressed to the point where there was almost no space for it to exist, it suddenly exploded. At the same time, they heard Elder Qingyi shout, "Die!" The red light was like blood. It sprayed forward and suddenly exploded the black aura. "Ah!" Ren Yufeng screamed. He couldn't control the black aura on his body anymore. Like ink dissolving into water, it slowly faded away. Puff! 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 In midair, the three of them fell one after another. Their momentum dispersed, and their spiritual aura gradually dissipated. They no longer had the spiritual aura pressure of a peak stage core formation cultivator. Emotienga and Wei Haolan watched for a while, but the three of them remained motionless. In the end, they couldn't help but run over. "Elder! Elder!" Wei Haolan rushed over. Her gauze hat fell off. Her withered face didn't have any luster. It was like a withered old tree, rough and dim. Elder Qingyi opened her eyes with difficulty and looked towards Ren Yufeng. When she saw that the black aura on his body had dissipated and he was motionless, she finally revealed a smile. She glanced at Elder Qingmiao, who was also speechless. Then both of them closed their eyes with smiles on their faces. Elder! Wei Haolan shouted loudly with grief in her eyes. Mo Tiange stared at Mo Tiange, then pressed her shoulder and shook her head at her. The two elders were beyond saving. How could Wei Haolan not know? She just found it hard to accept. Seeing her like this, Mo Tiange knew she needed time to accept, so she retreated and walked towards Ren Yufeng. Before she met Ren Yufeng, she never thought she'd be suppressed by a person to the point where she practically had no way out. A cultivator without any background, and even without any talent, actually made her spend 20 years with no way out. She mustn't look down on anyone. In this cultivation world full of variables, maybe an aura refining cultivator you look down on would be much stronger than you in the future. She heaved a long sigh, then picked up Ren Yufeng's Qingquan bag, then threw out a fire talisman, burning Ren Yufeng's corpse into ashes. She then raised her head to look at the dead aura that hadn't dispersed yet and frowned. This dead aura wouldn't disperse in a short time. Apparently, it would be a very long time before other people could set foot in this place. Xia Qing and Tang Shen ran over. When they saw the two elders' corpses, they were both dumbfounded. Elder! Wei Haolan stood up and calmly wiped the tears on her face. Elders done what they wanted to do. Now it's our turn. Senior Martial Sister, Junior Martial Sister Xia, collect the elders' corpses and send them to the Dao Achieving Pagoda. Junior Martial Brother Tang, regardless of whether they're Bishuan Court disciples or not, tell everyone to gather at the monastery gate. Yes. Xia Qing and Tang Shen both stood up and did as Wei Haolan ordered. Elder Mo Wei Haolan looked at Mo Tiange. The two elders already passed away, so you're the only elder left in Bishuan Court now. Please come with me to comfort the disciples. All right, I'll naturally obey. Tang Shen moved very quickly. Within the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, all the cultivators in Bishuan Court had already arrived at the monastery gate. Some people cheered jubilantly, while some people were anxious and fearful. The ones cheering jubilantly were the former Bishuan Court disciples, who'd been tortured for the past 20 years, and had finally waited for this day. The ones who were anxious and fearful were the individual cultivators accepted by Ren Yufeng. Almost all of them were male cultivators. When Bishuan Court was still around, although they weren't bullied or humiliated, they didn't have the chance to stand out. At first, they were happy about Bishuan Court's extermination, but later on, they discovered that having a cultivation group wasn't so wonderful. Wei Haolan's expression was cold. She was flying in the air, overlooking the numerous cultivators below her. She said, "Disciples, Bishuan Court has gone through a calamity, but in the end, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao sacrificed their lives to eliminate our enemy. From today onwards, Bishuan Court will be re-established, and all of you will return to the cultivation group." Before she could finish speaking, the Bishuan Court disciples below her already started cheering. They'd been waiting for this day for too long. Wei Haolan raised her hand, silencing their voices. In addition, as the sect head of Bishuan Court, I hereby announce that Bishuan Court is no longer a cultivation group for female cultivators. Regardless of whether they're male or female, as long as they pass the test, they can become official disciples. This news instantly caused an uproar among the crowd. All the male cultivators who weren't Bishuan Court disciples stared fixedly at Wei Haolan. Among them, the former Bishuan Court Foundation building female cultivators even cried out involuntarily, "Senior Martial Sister Sect Head." Wei Haolan merely glanced at them indifferently. These are the two elders' final orders. She then turned towards the others. For those who aren't Bishuan Court disciples, we'll let bygones be bygones as long as they didn't bully us. 2 days later, Bishuan Court will hold its reconstruction ceremony, and at the same time, we'll recruit new disciples. Chapter 221. Wei Haolan's announcement set off a storm in Linhai. As a cultivation group for female cultivators, Bishuang Court had been in Linhai for several thousand years. Everyone had long been accustomed to it and accepted their fate. Now that they learned Bishuang Court was going to recruit disciples, all the male cultivators in Linhai were delighted. Bishuang Court's female cultivators, on the other hand, felt a bit lost because this also meant they wouldn't have any privileges anymore. Senior Martial Sister Sect Head. Someone came to the door that very night. Mo Tiange and Wei Haolan were discussing important matters when they heard the voice outside, causing them to glance at each other. There were 1,000 things waiting to be done. The main hall was temporarily sealed, so they were now in an ordinary room without any disciples guarding the door. Seeing that Mo Tiange didn't have any objections, Wei Haolan waved her hand to remove the soundproof barrier. Come in. The person who entered was Senior Martial Sister Yang, who once fought with that unruly young Miss Hua Yilin out of jealousy. After Ren Yufeng was killed, Xia Qing brought the two elders' remains back to the Dao Achieving Pagoda to worship them. Afterward, everyone devoted themselves to rebuilding the group. The first thing they did was to recompile Bishuan Court's disciple roster. According to the disciples who stayed here, when Ren Yufeng suddenly appeared that year, they were all caught off guard. Some died, some ran away, but half of them didn't have time to escape. Many of them suffered extreme torture before they managed to survive. Fortunately, Ren Yufeng was infected by the dead aura and gradually lost his mortal desires. Otherwise, who knew how many disciples in a cultivation group for female cultivators would have been humiliated? However, when he recruited disciples later, he accepted everyone regardless of who they were. And there were also some people with bad conduct. Upon hearing this, Wei Haolan showed no mercy. As long as they were identified, they would all be beheaded. Fortunately, this kind of thing wasn't common. Among the individual cultivators they recruited, only a few of them lost their humanity like Ren Yufeng. Most of the Bishuan Court disciples just suffered a bit, but didn't suffer any humiliation. On one hand, she rewarded them. On the other hand, she displayed her might. Everyone, regardless of whether they were Bishuan Court disciples or not, finally quieted down. Next, they had to deal with the specific matters of rebuilding the group. Senior Martial Sister Sect Head. After Senior Martial Sister Yang saluted, she didn't say anything and just stared at Mo Tiange. Wei Haolan said, Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao already decided to invite this fellow Taoist Yi to become our Bishuan Court's guest elder. If you have something to say, just say it. There's no need to hide it. Not revealing her real name was also Mo Tiange's request. Since she used the name Yi Xiaotian in Bishuan Court, there was no need for her to keep changing it. Moreover, she hadn't reported this matter to her master yet, so it was better for her to keep a low profile. Wei Haolan didn't care about this matter, so she listened to her. Yes. Senior Martial Sister Yang took a few more glances at Mo Tiange, then asked cautiously, Senior Martial Sister Sect Head, do you think our Bishuan Court will no longer be a cultivation group for female cultivators from now on? Will the offerings and whatnot be reduced? Wei Haolan could not help but frown as she said, You don't have to worry about this matter. Before the two elders left, they had already come to an agreement. Oh, I see. Senior Martial Sister Yang let out a hollow laugh, then cast a glance at Mo Tiange. In that case, since the two elders have passed away, shouldn't we elect another elder? Of course. Wei Haolan didn't hide anything. We'll elect 2 temporary elders. The 2 elders, and I will be responsible for the main matters. As for the future, according to our group's rules, once a disciple forms his or her gold core, he or she will automatically be promoted to an elder. Without waiting for Senior Martial Sister Yang to ask again, Wei Haolan said bluntly, Junior Martial Sister Yang, there are too many things to do now that the group is being rebuilt. I really don't have time to answer these questions. If you're free, can you go and help Junior Martial Sister Xia and Junior Martial Brother Tang? Okay. Since the sect head ordered her to do so, what else could she do? After Senior Martial Sister Yang left, Wei Haolan angrily threw the new register on the table and said mockingly, I already said it wasn't difficult to recall the disciples, but it was very difficult to rebuild their self-esteem. Now, it seems I have to add another condition. It's even more difficult to make them set aside their selfishness for the time being. What kind of situation is this? The two elders have already passed away, but what kind of people are they saving? Emotinga tried to persuade her. No matter where you are, people like that are everywhere. Sect head, don't be too angry. The important matter is more important. Wei Haolan nodded. You're right. I just hate that they don't know what's important. It's really annoying. Then don't count on them. In any case, the two elders have already decided on these matters, so we just need to do as they say. When the two elders were mentioned, Wei Haolan was silent for a while. She then took a deep breath and pulled herself together. In 2 days, we'll cremate the two elders first and offer them to the patriarch. In the future, whenever there's incense from the patriarch, the two elders will have a share. Emotinga didn't have any objections. This should be done. Without the two elders, the group can't be rebuilt. In addition, Elder Yi, Wei Haolan changed the way she addressed Emotinga. I've already asked Junior Marshal Sister Xia and Junior Marshal Brother Tang to pick some reliable people to be in charge of recruiting disciples. But just in case, I still need you to establish your prestige. Emotinga nodded. Bishuan Court would no longer only recruit female disciples. So in the beginning, there would definitely be a mix of good and bad people. So it was necessary to intimidate them. As for the other matters, I have a lot of things to think about at the moment. Elder Yi, you've worked hard. Go and rest first. We still have a lot of things to do. Okay. Emotinga didn't refuse. She indeed wasn't good at school matters, and she couldn't help Wei Haolan for the time being. It would be better for her to go back and adjust her condition. She would also be able to intimidate those who were dissatisfied with her. After leaving Wei Haolan's room, Emotinga randomly chose a room in the building, laid a defensive formation, then entered the virtual sky world, which she hadn't seen in a long time. Inside the virtual sky world, the bamboo shadows rustled and the wind blew gently. It was no different from 20 years ago. In the beginning, she couldn't enter the virtual sky world, but later on, she didn't have the chance to. These 20 years were both simple and complicated. Inside the Tao Achieving Pagoda, aside from healing and cultivating, there was nothing else to do. However, in order to defeat Ren Yufeng, they made countless plans, which almost exhausted them both physically and mentally. Now they were finally free. She dragged her exhausted body towards the small room. A golden dumpling ran out of the small room. As soon as it saw her, it pounced on her. Emotinga reached out to catch it, then stroked its head. Long time no see, Feifei. This Feifei, which was on the verge of making a realm breakthrough, but had been left inside the virtual sky world for 20 years, was now finally in the second rank. Its fur had also turned from white to golden. Feifei arched itself in her arms. Although they hadn't seen each other for 20 years, they had signed a contract, so Feifei didn't alienate her in the slightest. After returning to the small room, Emotinga put Feifei down. I'm really too tired. Can you go and play first? Feifei seemed to understand her words, and became much more intelligent than before. It stared at her with its black eyes for a while, then jumped onto her shoulder, and put its paw on her head. In an instant, a warm current flowed from Feifei's paw. Emotinga felt warm all over. And in an instant, all her fatigue disappeared without a trace. Feifei could make people forget their worries. So it was true. After an unknown amount of time, Emotinga finally woke up. All the fatigue in her body disappeared without a trace, whether it was physical or mental. Feifei squeaked, then jumped down from her shoulder, and arched itself in her arms to please her. Emotinga smiled and stroked its head. Thank you. Having received her praise, Feifei happily rolled around in her arms. Holding Feifei in her arms, Emotinga took out a Qingquan bag from inside her robe and pondered. This was Ren Yufeng's Qingquan bag. She put it away, but because she had too many things to do, she forgot to give it to Wei Haolan. Now that she was looking at this Qingquan bag, an idea came to her mind. She put her hand inside and fumbled for a while. Finally, she took out a heavy stone tablet. This was the stone tablet Ren Yufeng obtained from the ancient sacrificial temple. the one that recorded the so-called divine dragon secret technique. On the surface, this stone tablet didn't seem abnormal, and the drawings on it were also very simple. At the very front was a drawing of a dragon's skeleton and a person casting a spell. At the back, there were also drawings of many human bodies and some postures. There were also some patterns drawn inside the human bodies, which seemed to be spiritual aura circulation methods. In addition, there were also some simple words carved on the side, but these ancient characters had long been lost, so she couldn't make out their meaning. Strange, there didn't seem to be anything abnormal. She couldn't help but reach out to touch it, but the moment she touched the surface of the stone tablet's patterns, her whole body went numb. Then, many strange thoughts were transmitted from the stone tablet to her body. Many scenes appeared in her mind: dragons flying in the sky, fighting corpses. In the end, a person standing on top of a dragon's skeleton, absorbing the divine dragon's breath. The strange thing was, what he absorbed was black aura, and the divine dragon's breath on the dragon's skeleton was getting stronger and stronger. She heard the sound of woo-woo. Fei suddenly jumped over and bit her finger. Emotinga felt pain on her fingertip. She came back to her senses from her meditation and broke out in a cold sweat. Sure enough, there was something wrong with this so-called divine dragon secret technique. It wasn't that the drawings were wrong, nor was it that her comprehension was wrong. This technique itself was a kind of evil technique. This stone tablet had a kind of wonderful power. As soon as she touched it, her mind would be completely attracted to it. If Fei hadn't woken her up from her fantasy in time, the consequences would have been too horrible to contemplate. Thinking up to this point, Emotinga hugged Fei, feeling extremely grateful. Fortunately, you saved me. Thank you so much. Fei tilted its head and looked at her for a moment. It then jumped down and kicked the stone tablet away with its short hind legs. It then shook its head at her. This thing can't be touched. Emotinga guessed its meaning from her divine comprehension. Fei whimpered twice, but it still approached her and put its hand on hers. That wonderful power appeared again, and very soon, Emotinga regained her calmness. Alright, I understand. The existence of the contract made them trust each other. So Emotinga trusted Fei without any hesitation. She ignored the stone tablet and continued to search Ren Yufeng's Qingkuan bag. There were still a lot of things inside. Spirit stones, materials, magic tools. There wasn't anything special. There were just a lot of spirit stones and good materials. But the magic tools were very ordinary. Right. After Ren Yufeng cultivated the evil technique, he never used magic tools. His dead aura was his best means of attack. As for these spirit stones and materials, he must have plundered them in Linhai all these years, right? Spirit stones aside, there were a lot of beast cores and materials unique to the Eastern Sea, so that should be the case. Emotinga thought about it and decided to return this Qingkuan bag to Wei Haolan. She didn't care about these materials, and she didn't lack spirit stones. But for Bishuan Court, which had just been rebuilt, these were timely help. Chapter 222. In the past 2 days, the wandering Bishuan Court disciples came back one after another. What was gratifying was that most of the foundation building cultivators were still alive. But there were more troublesome matters ahead. First of all, many foundation building cultivators objected to Bishuan Court's decision to no longer accept only female disciples. This tradition had been going on for several thousand years, so they were already used to it. Although Wei Haolan was quite famous, she was still a foundation building cultivator. There weren't many foundation building male cultivators in the group, and after the disaster, there were even fewer, so they didn't have much confidence in their words. Nevertheless, after this disaster, Wei Haolan's temperament was much stronger than it was 20 years ago. She forcefully suppressed all the opposing voices and expressed that this was the two elders' idea. In addition, there were also some people who were angry because the 6 of them hid in the Dao Achieving Pagoda and abandoned everyone else. However, the 2 elders were the ones who made this decision, so they didn't dare to disrespect them. So they made things difficult for Wei Haolan. Emotinga made 2 moves. which made these people realize that although the core formation elders were gone, the new elders weren't to be trifled with. In the end, these people were finally convinced. 2 days later, Bishwan Court's reconstruction ceremony was held as scheduled. Early in the morning, Bishwan Court's gate was opened, and non-sect disciples poured in. After these individual cultivators were tested on their spiritual roots and cultivation levels, those who were allowed to join the group went to the square and lined up. Bishwan Court didn't have strict requirements for disciples. Even those with 5 spiritual roots could join as long as they weren't too weak, and could only stay in the first or second layer of the aura refining realm their whole lives. Soon, the total number of Bishwan Court disciples exceeded 1,000, including the original disciples who returned. In the past 20 years, Run Yufeng established the Divine Dragon sect. If there was anyone who didn't obey him, he would kill them to cultivate his dead aura. The cultivators in Linhai either died or fled, so there weren't many of them left. Being able to accept so many disciples was already very good. This was also the 2 elders' intention. First, Bishwan Court suffered heavy casualties, and there were only a few cultivators in Linhai. If they weren't willing to open their gate, Bishwan Court would weaken little by little until it couldn't be saved. Secondly, although Shangguan Yunhao's matter was caused by his own bad intentions, Bishwan Court's rules weren't without its drawbacks. If male cultivators could also obtain the same status as female cultivators, there would be a lot fewer inducements for male cultivators. After taking everything into consideration, it was inevitable that Bishwan Court would change the way they managed their group. If they remained stagnant, they'd only walk step by step towards death. From now on, Bishwan Court's transporting formation would be open to the public. As long as one could afford the transportation fee, everyone could use the transporting formation. In addition, the disciples of the sect had to go out and travel before they advanced to the next stage to increase their knowledge. These were all things the 2 elders explained to them one by one before they left the pagoda. These past few years, Wei Haolan and Mo Tiange had a lot of exchanges, so she learned a lot about Kunwu Cultivation Group's management methods. She already had a feeling about them, so she agreed to them one by one. As for the problem of brain drain, it was unnecessary to worry about it. Linhai lacked resources, and Kunwu also didn't lack impoverished areas. However, although there weren't any big cultivation groups in those impoverished areas, there were still small and medium-sized cultivation groups, so they could still survive. Besides, the terrain of the Eastern Sea was special, so it was very difficult to obtain some beast cores and materials from the sea in Kunwu. If things went well, it might be a new source of income. In short, after experiencing the crisis of extermination, the 2 elders had already gotten over it. Wei Haolan also got over it. Bishwan Court would only be finished if they didn't communicate with the outside world. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. In fact, Mo Yaoqing's original intention in establishing a cultivation group for female cultivators was good. However, as time went by, things often changed, so the people in power had to constantly adjust. Brilliant people in power had to understand the principle that things changed with the passage of time. Bishwan Court's set of rules had been in place for several thousand years, so it was time to change them. At noon, all the cultivators finished their tests. A new batch of disciples lined up in the square, waiting for the sect head's instructions. The eliminated cultivators, however, were reluctant to leave because they wanted to witness Bishwan Court's rarely seen event. Wei Haolan and the other foundation-building cultivators were all very cautious today. Their clothes were luxurious, and their makeup was exquisite. Even Mo Tiange changed out of her Taoist robe and put on Bishwan Court's uniform to match the occasion. In any case, her identity today was Bishwan Court's guest elder, so she had to show her sincerity. They first paid their respects to the group's founder, then cremated the 2 elders' corpses and enshrined them in the ancestral temple. Moreover, their memorial tablets were placed on the same level as the only elder who advanced to the nascent soul realm aside from the founder, indicating that the 2 elders' contributions to Bishwan Court were no less than those of nascent soul cultivators. After the mourning was over, Wei Haolan announced a series of decisions. Disciples, Bishuan Court will be rebuilt today. From now on, male and female cultivators will be treated equally. There will no longer be any difference. New disciples will be divided into official disciples and part-time disciples. Part-time disciples who pass the test can become official disciples. Every 10 years, a group competition will be held. The winners will receive foundation-building pills, which will no longer be decided by the elders of the group. Then there was the issue of treatment. During this great calamity, Bishuan Court suffered disastrous losses. None of our core formation elders survived. Before Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingmiao passed away, they invited fellow Taoist Yi Xiaotian to become Bishuan Court's guest elder. From now on, every disciple of our group must respect her, as if she were a core formation elder. At this point, Wei Haolan looked towards Emotienga. Emotienga took a few steps forward, then cupped her hands slightly, performing a half salute. Seeing as Emotienga didn't want to speak, Wei Haolan spoke again. Elder Ye's cultivation level is outstanding, and she's very capable. She can be considered the #1 cultivator below the core formation realm. With her here, presumably, Bishuan Court can develop with peace of mind. As she said that, Wei Haolan's gaze swept over several restless foundation-building cultivators as a warning. Although Emotienga felt Wei Haolan's words were a bit exaggerated, she still calmly accepted it. In Bishuan Court, she indeed didn't fear any cultivators. Wei Haolan only said that to warn the restless disciples. Because all the core formation elders in our group have passed away, we've decided to choose 2 temporary elders among the foundation-building cultivators to take on the responsibilities of elders until a new core formation elder appears. Upon hearing what she said, more than 10 foundation-building cultivators all raised their heads and stared at her. They'd long heard about this matter. As elders, they had a lot more offerings compared to ordinary cultivators, so every single one of them wanted to be an elder, but they didn't know how to choose one. Wei Haolan's gaze was calm. She didn't immediately say, "Junior Marshal brothers and sisters, we'll discuss this matter in detail later." Soon after, she said some words of encouragement to the disciples before announcing the end of the ceremony. But the end of the ceremony was only the beginning of the bustling process. With so many new disciples, Immortals' caves had to be arranged. Most of Bishuan Court's original disciples were female cultivators, so they also had to be rearranged and separated from the male cultivators. Wei Haolan's feet didn't touch the ground during such a bustling process. Emotienga couldn't help with these matters, and she also didn't like it, so she returned to the residence arranged for her to rest. She couldn't go to the Dao Achieving Pagoda for the time being. Although she even went to the most secretive 7th floor, that was, after all, an expedient move. She was only a guest elder, and wasn't a real member of Bishuan Court, so there were still some matters she needed to avoid. Now that there were no core formation elders in the group, Wei Haolan also discussed with her about how to handle the Dao Achieving Pagoda. Bishuan Court had suffered disastrous losses. Aside from recruiting new disciples, the most important thing right now was to cultivate core formation cultivators again. Only with core formation cultivators would the group have some confidence. Wei Haolan's idea was to take advantage of the opportunity of selecting temporary elders to choose 5 foundation-building cultivators to live in the Dao Achieving Pagoda. She would then assign the 2nd to 6th floors to them and help them form their gold cores with all their might. The Dao Achieving Pagoda was full of spiritual aura. Not all of them could form their gold cores, but it was very possible for 1 or 2 of them to form their gold cores. Emotienga approved of this idea. However, this didn't have much to do with her. As long as Bishuan Court was on the right track, she could leave Linhai and return to Kunwu. She never expected that an ordinary experiential learning would take more than 20 years. She also didn't know how her acquaintances at Xianqing School were doing. Did they miss her and worry about her? Oh right. Before she left, Master asked for a drop of her blood essence, so he should know she was fine. However, she hadn't returned yet. Did he come out to look for her? She was about to leave, but she couldn't calm down. She'd waited for 20 years, but at the last moment, she couldn't sit still anymore. She wished she could give up everything and fly back to Xianqing School. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, A voice came from the door. Senior Yi, are you there? Emotinga frowned slightly. This voice. Right, it was Ilu's voice. She opened the formation and the door. Sure enough, she saw the two sisters standing outside. Senior Yi, it's really you. The two sisters called out in surprise. Emotinga was also quite surprised and happy. She didn't expect they'd come back safe and sound. It's you. Quickly come in and sit. Ilu and Ichio beamed with joy and nodded hurriedly. Upon entering the room, the two of them looked around then said, Senior, why is the room so messy? Should we tidy it up? Emotinga couldn't help but laugh. We haven't seen each other for 20 years. Yet you want to tidy up the room as soon as you see me? You're really fated to be mates. Your cultivation levels aren't bad, so you should be official disciples now, right? You don't have to help me with these things. Ichio was a bit embarrassed. We're used to it, Ilu smiled. Senior, you're an elder of Bishuan Court now. Even if we're official disciples, we should still do some things for you. Right. Ichio promptly stood up. Senior, please take a seat. We'll talk to you while we tidy up. All right. Since they were so enthusiastic, she couldn't keep refusing them. Right back then, did you escape? Were you injured? The two sisters were silent for a while before Ilu sighed and said, Back then, we were guarding the concocting room, so we were watching it from the beginning. Fortunately, Ichio and I didn't die. We were just seriously injured. Later, when the school was in chaos, us seriously injured disciples took advantage of our familiarity with the terrain to escape. And, Ichio continued, elder sister and I didn't dare to return to the school, so we hid on a small island in the sea. That island didn't have any spirit veins, so no cultivators came to it. It was very safe. Fortunately, we exchanged a lot of medicinal pills with Senior, so we hid on that island all these years to heal our injuries. You hid like that for 20 years. Ilu smiled bitterly. We also came back once. At that time, the whole of Linhai was in chaos. Whether it was our group's disciples or individual cultivators. If they ran into that devil, they would most likely be tortured. During that time, all the cultivators in Linhai went into hiding. It was very difficult to see a single cultivator in Linhai town. Yes. Aside from some shameless cultivators who relied on that devil, we cultivators living in exile were unprecedentedly united. We kept each other informed, so we could survive. This could also be considered a blessing and misfortune. Really? Emotiengo was a bit surprised. She originally thought those individual cultivators would dislike Bishuan Court cultivators, because they attracted such a disaster. That's right. Ichio smiled and said. In fact, our Bishuan Court's reputation among individual cultivators wasn't very good before. However, in the past 20 years, because we had a common enemy and were in the same situation, we became a lot closer. This time, the sect head announced that he would abolish the school rules and treat male cultivators equally. So they were very happy. Now our Bishuan Court's reputation has risen greatly, presumably, will rise again very soon. Chapter 223. Emotinga stayed in Bishuan Court for about a month. The matter of rebuilding the group progressed very smoothly. As Ilu and Ichio said, Ren Yufeng's matter gave Bishuan Court a chance to be reborn. When she arrived in Linhai, Bishuan Court was on the decline. There were few people with spiritual roots, and even fewer people with high aptitudes. In addition, they only accepted female cultivators. So male cultivators had to pay a huge price to become official disciples of Bishuan Court. The unfair environment created fierce conflicts. Although Bishuan Court didn't bully others for no reason, as the only cultivation group in Linhai, it was inevitably overbearing. This kind of overbearingness was whitewashed under the surface of peace, but in fact, undercurrents were turbulent. Once there was a breakthrough, it would lead to a disaster. But no one expected Bishuan Court to suffer such a disaster. Its most outstanding disciple, who was also most likely to advance to the core formation realm, rebelled. 3 core formation elders all died, and the group was almost exterminated. The individual cultivators in Linhai were also unlucky. They also lived in fear, so they resolved their conflicts and stood together. In addition, after Bishuan Court was rebuilt, Wei Haolan announced the abolition of the group rule of only accepting female cultivators, which further promoted the change of Bishuan Court's image. From now on, Bishuan Court wasn't just a cultivation group for female cultivators. It was also a cultivation group in Linhai. As for the group itself, 2 temporary elders had been decided, and one of them was Tang Shen. This guy cultivated diligently for 20 years and made rapid progress. Coupled with the fact that there were no more talented people, he unexpectedly became the #1 expert in Bishuan Court. The weak young master who had a handsome face and was hostile to all male cultivators in the past was actually reborn. It was really surprising. This was also good for Emotienga. Now that Tang Shen had grown up, Wei Haolan wouldn't be alone and helpless, so she could leave sooner. Thus, Emotienga bid farewell to Wei Haolan. Wei Haolan actually wanted to ask her to stay, but seeing that Emotienga was determined to leave, and that she indeed stayed in Linhai for too long, she didn't say much. In the end, they went through trials and tribulations together, and now they were comrades in the same boat. So before leaving, Wei Haolan personally came to see her off. Elder Yi, these are the offerings for the elders in the group. After you leave, we might not see each other for several decades, so I'll give them to you this time. Seeing Wei Haolan's sincere smile, Emotienga took the Qingquan bag and touched it. This amount was at least tens of thousands of spirit stones. For the cultivators of Linhai, it was a huge sum of money. Sect leader, the sect has just been rebuilt, and spirit stones are of great use. 10,000 spirit stones is not a small amount. Is it okay to give it to me? Wei Haolan smiled and said. If it was a few days ago, I might have been reluctant, but now it doesn't matter. Oh, Emotienga was puzzled. Why is that? Wei Haolan deliberately didn't say it. Why don't you guess? Emotienga pondered for a moment. Could it be that you found some kind of treasure? That's right, Wei Haolan said with a smile. A few days ago, a disciple of the sect came to report that a spirit stone mine was discovered in the sea. It's not far from the sea, and there aren't any high-level demonic beasts. It's completely possible to excavate it. Really? Emotienga was pleasantly surprised. This was really timely assistance. Congratulations, congratulations. Same to you, Wei Haolan said with a smile. Indeed, one who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune later on. Our Bishuan court didn't collapse during this calamity. Now, we're experiencing one happy event after another. That being the case, I can leave with peace of mind. Wei Haolan seemed a bit reluctant to part with Emotienga. Elder Yi, I'm really a bit reluctant to see you leave. Emotienga smiled and said. Whether you're willing or not, we'll meet again eventually. So you'll come back? Since I accepted the position of guest elder, I'll naturally come back to visit if I have time. Wei Haolan nodded then sighed. I know cultivators shouldn't be so persistent. Elder Yi is so magnanimous, so I'm sure you'll succeed in forming your gold core. Emotienga pursed her lips into a smile. Whether I succeed or not depends on the will of the heavens. She paused for a moment then said. When I return this time, I'll directly enter closed-door meditation until I form my gold core. I think even if we can meet again, it'll probably be several decades later. She was now in the late stage of the foundation building realm, and it would take her at least 10 or 20 years to reach the peak stage of the foundation building realm. If she failed to form her gold core a few more times, although her aptitude wasn't the same as before, things like realm breakthroughs weren't foolproof. Wei Haolan asked. Then what should we do if we want to find you? Can we go to Xianqing school? Emotienga thought for a moment, then took out a jade talisman from inside her robe. This is a 10,000 miles sound-transmitting talisman. I sealed a strand of my divine sense inside it. If you need me for something urgent, just crush it. I'll immediately sense it, and I'll rush over as fast as I can. She thought for a moment then said. If you want to find me, just go to Xianqing school and ask to see me. I'm a disciple of Lord Taoist Jinghe of Clear Spring Peak. My name is Emotienga. Wei Haolan took the sound-transmitting talisman and thought for a moment. Elder Yi, you said you were a disciple of Lord Taoist Xianin? I didn't remember wrong, right? Emotinga had no choice but to apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't tell you the truth. In fact, my master is Lord Taoist Jinghe, and Lord Taoist Xianin is my master's first disciple. Before I built my foundation, I was always taught by this senior martial brother of mine. I see. Wei Haolan sighed. Your senior martial brother is also a nascent soul cultivator. It seems your master is quite amazing. My master is very good. When she thought of Lord Taoist Jinghe, a faint smile appeared on her face. It had been more than 20 years since they last met. She really missed that unreliable master of hers. Although he was always disrespectful, always did some ridiculous things, had an eccentric temper, and was as fickle as a child, he always treated her sincerely. The two of them chatted for a while before they finally went to the transporting formation. Wei Haolan led Emotinga through many twists and turns before they finally arrived at an inconspicuous small building. This small building was obviously dilapidated, but there were intact formations outside. Wei Haolan spent some effort to open these restrictions. Emotinga was amazed. Sect head, is the transporting formation here? She heard the transporting formation leading to the outside was very mysterious. In the past 20 years, Ren Yufeng also wanted to use this formation to go to the outside world, but he never found it. It was actually in this ordinary small building. Wei Haolan smiled and said, You didn't expect this, did you? In fact, we didn't go this way. There's a tunnel leading to this place in the main hall of the conference hall. If there are disciples going out, they'll use that tunnel. We only send a group of disciples out every few years, and they're all our trusted disciples, so the secret is well protected. Emotinga nodded. She looked around, but in her heart, she recalled Yen Ruoshu and the others she met in Ziwei's Immortal's cave. When she first met them, she never expected she would have this kind of entanglement with Bishuan Court. She also never expected she would become Bishuan Court's guest elder. It just so happened that Bishuan Court went through a catastrophe in the past 20 years. Too many disciples went missing, so no one asked about their whereabouts. However, she didn't need to worry about this matter. In any case, the deaths of Yen Ruoshu and the others had nothing to do with her. Sect head Elder Yi. After entering the small building, they followed the stone steps to the underground. The disciple guarding the tunnel bowed to them. Wei Haolan nodded, then led Emotinga to the innermost room. This was an extremely complicated star atlas formation. There were specks of light on it, which coincided with some kind of astrology. Upon closer inspection, there were some special differences. Upon seeing Emotinga's gaze, Wei Haolan said, Demonic Mountain has strange restrictions, so ordinary transporting formations can't send people there. I heard from the elders that this transporting formation is a kind of ancient transporting formation. I don't know where the patriarch found it. So that's how it is. Mo Yaoqing's attainments and formations were indeed quite outstanding. Unfortunately, there weren't many records in her notebook. Elder Yi. Wei Haolan didn't immediately send Emotinga into the transporting formation. She frowned slightly, but in the end, she couldn't help but laugh. Even if you escort a gentleman for 1,000 miles, you'll have to part in the end. I'm being naggy again. Emotinga also laughed. After getting along with Wei Haolan for 20 years, Emotinga really liked her temperament. She was decisive, valued benefits, liked to weigh the pros and cons, and was ruthless, but she was also heroic and straightforward. No one was perfect. Among cultivators, it was really not easy to meet such a woman. Wei Haolan pondered for a while, then said, In these 2 years, how about I hide your whereabouts and just say you're in closed-door meditation? Although Junior Martial Brother Tang's not bad now, he's still a bit too inexperienced. Emotinga nodded subconsciously, but when she regained her composure she smiled and said, Sect head, why do your words sound so awkward to me? Junior Martial Brother Tang's a bit older than me. Age doesn't matter in cultivation. Wei Haolan smiled. Although you're young, you're very mature. This is something Junior Martial Brother Tang can never catch up to. What she said made Emotinga want to reflect on herself. Although I'm young, I'm very mature. What she said. Doesn't that mean my mentality is much older than my actual age? Oh, to women, This kind of saying always made them feel like they were aging prematurely. Although as a cultivator, it's better to be a bit mature. When Emotinga finally finished speaking, she stepped into the transporting formation. Wei Haolan personally laid down spirit stones. Then, I'll take my leave first. Wei Haolan smiled. We'll meet again, Elder Yi. Oh no, I prefer to call you fellow Taoist Yi. Emotinga cupped her hands. The transporting formation shone brightly. At the last moment, Emotinga suddenly remembered something. She hurriedly took something out of her Qingquan bag and threw it out. Sect head, this is... Before she could finish speaking, she already disappeared into the transporting formation. Wei Haolan was flabbergasted. She picked up the small box on the ground and opened it. Inside were rows of neatly arranged jade bottles. She took out a jade bottle and pulled out the cork. A pleasantly surprised expression flitted across her face. She hastily opened the second jade bottle, then the third. The pleasantly surprised expression on her face became more and more intense. In the end, Wei Haolan hugged the box tightly. She stared at the now empty transporting formation and said, Elder Yi, thank you. The first bottle contained foundation-building pills. The second bottle contained soul-strengthening pills. The third bottle was the same. These medicinal pills were enough to cultivate a group of foundation-building cultivators. They could even support a foundation-building cultivator, all the way to the peak stage of the foundation-building realm. In the end, this Elder Yi didn't accept Bishuan Court's offerings for nothing. When the light from the transporting formation dissipated, Emo Tiange was already standing on Kunwa's land. She softly sniffed the rich spiritual aura in the air, then looked at the stretch of high mountains in the distance. Kunwu, it's indeed Kunwu. I'm finally back. Before she could calm her excitement, a ray of light appeared in the distant sky. This ray of light was getting closer and closer, brighter and brighter. It was actually a glowing feather. Emo Tiange reached out her hand. The feather fell into her palm and turned into a talisman. This was Xianqing School's summoning talisman. Chapter 224. School summoning talismans were mainly divided into two types. One was the disciple summoning talisman, which was used to communicate with fellow disciples. Once this talisman was sent out, all the disciples within a certain range would receive it. Disciples who were away from home could receive several before leaving the mountain. The other type was the master summoning talisman. Once this talisman was sent out, as long as one had a Xianqing School identity tablet, they could receive it no matter where they were in the celestial pole. However, this talisman was very difficult to make, and it required a lot of people. So generally speaking, it wouldn't be used casually. The first talisman Emo Tiange received was the Master Summoning Talisman. It had been 22 years since she left Mount Taikong, but as soon as she set foot on Kunwa's land, she actually received the Master Summoning Talisman. Emo Tiange frowned slightly and unfolded the talisman. Xianqing School disciples, listen to my order. All disciples in the foundation-building realm and above, regardless of whether they have errands or not, are to put down whatever they're doing and return to Mount Taikong before the 6th day of the 6th month. There was only such a simple command, and no reason was mentioned at all, causing Emo Tiange to be dumbfounded. Xianqing School had more than 200 foundation-building disciples in total. Although many of them died in the demonic beast riot several decades ago, it had been more than 30 years, so they should have almost recovered. In addition to the foundation-building disciples who managed the shops and were ordered to run errands outside, there must be about 300 disciples in total. Why did they summon so many disciples back to the mountain? Moreover, many of Xianqing School's important industries were managed by foundation-building cultivators outside. If they were all summoned back, a lot of things would come to a standstill. Was this matter that serious? Emo Tiange shook her head and flicked her fingers, igniting the talisman in her hand. A spiritual light was emitted from the burnt talisman and flew towards the sky. This was the reply from the Master Summoning Talisman. At the same time, a similar spiritual light streaked across the sky. Emo Tiange smiled when she saw it. Seems like a fellow disciple is also here. That's good. She soared up and flew towards the place where the spiritual light came from. Before long, Her divine sense sensed someone flying towards her. As soon as their divine senses came into contact, they quickly flew towards each other. The person was indeed a Xianqing school disciple. When he saw her from afar, he saluted, "Senior Martial Sister." It was a young man in the early stage of the foundation building realm. Although he called her Senior Martial Sister, his expression and tone were a bit arrogant. Looking at this person's appearance, he was no more than 17 or 18 years old, so he must be very young. A young talent would always be a little arrogant, but this was nothing. With a faint smile on her face, Mo Tiange also raised her hand to return his salute. "Junior Martial Brother, greetings." The two met in the air and stood still, sizing each other up. The young man realized that she was still a young girl, but he didn't take it to heart. Among the female cultivators of the large sex, there were many who cultivated youth-retaining techniques. Even if they couldn't maintain their youthful looks, they could still afford to buy look-preserving pills. This senior sister has also received a message from the sect, and is returning to the sect? The young man asked. Of Mo. The youth smiled and said, "In that case, how about we travel together? Mo fellow Mo Su's sect, Mo and Mo Master Su. Mo." As they set off on their journey back, the young man introduced himself. "My surname is Lan, and my name is a single character Ling. I'm a disciple of Sweet Dew Peak. May I know senior's name?" "Lan Ling?" The corners of Mo Tiange's mouth couldn't help but curve upwards. With such a girly name, it was no wonder he had to emphasize that it was the Ling from Chioling. "My name is Mo Tiange, a disciple of Clear Spring Peak." "Oh, so it's senior sister from Clear Spring Peak." The young man tilted his head and looked at her again. "Senior Martial Sister, are you here to travel or to handle some matters?" "Traveling." Mo Tiange gave him a simple explanation, then asked, "Junior Martial Brother Lan, what's this place?" "Huh." Astonishment flashed in Lan Ling's eyes. "Senior Martial Sister Mo is here. But you actually don't know where this place is?" Mo Tiange shook her head softly. "I came here through a transporting formation, but I haven't had time to ask around." "Oh, I see," Lan Ling said. "This is the southeast of Kunwu, not far from Tiandao sect." Upon hearing this answer, Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. "So it's here. What's going on here?" Lan Ling was curious. Wasn't this place near Yunwu sect? However, she didn't have the time, nor was she in the mood to return to Yunwu sect, so she only said faintly, "I've been here before." "Oh." Lan Ling nodded, then didn't say anything else. He could see that Mo Tiange wasn't a talkative person, and he himself was quite arrogant. Even if she was a senior martial sister in the late stage of the foundation building realm, he still disdained flattering her. Mo Tiange was happy to see this, so the two of them focused on hurrying on their journey. They were now in the southeast of Kunwu, and Xianqing School happened to be in the west of Kunwu. On their way back, they met some fellow disciples one after another. 2 became 3, 3 became 4, and finally, the number of people traveling with them reached 8. There were so many people, and among them, there were some who liked to talk, so they started to chatter all the way. Mo Tiange hadn't been back for more than 20 years, so she didn't know so many things happened in the school, so she listened with great interest. For example, Grandmaster Xinjiang and Grandmaster Lingxiu wanted to betroth their favorite disciples, Martial Uncle Bai and Martial Uncle Jiang. However, when Martial Uncle Bai found out about this, he disliked Martial Uncle Jiang for being unruly and refused to agree. When Martial Uncle Jiang heard about this, the whole world was turned upside down. The Martial Uncle Bai and Martial Uncle Jiang they were talking about should be Junior Martial Sister Jiang, the disciple of Bai Yanfei and Lord Taoist Lingxiu. Mo Tiange had heard about Junior Martial Sister Jiang before. She was Martial Uncle Lingxiu's blood-related descendant, and was doted on since she was a child. So she was unruly and willful. In Drifting Cloud Peak, she was like a little overlord. Even in other peaks, no one dared to say anything about her. Someone asked, "This Martial Uncle Jiang is still young. Our Xianqing school doesn't focus on lust between men and women. Even for dual cultivation, we usually only consider it after we reach the core formation realm. Right? Why do you want to betroth them now?" The person who spoke was an old man. Although this old man was quite old, and his hair was already white, he was very talkative. Emotinga didn't know where he heard this rumor, but these days, he was always gossiping with others. Now he said with a smile, "Junior martial brother, don't forget how old Grandmaster Lingshu is. He's about to pass away." Emotinga nodded secretly when she heard what he said. That's right. This Grandmaster Lingshu's lifespan is almost up, so he's anxious to find a backer for his beloved descendant, right? Unfortunately, Junior Martial's sister Jiang is too unruly. I'm afraid she'll let him down. Oh, so that's how it is. The previous person understood. Grandmaster Lingshu looks very spirited, but he's actually about to pass away. The old man stroked his beard and narrowed his eyes. In any case, Grandmaster Lingshu is a nascent soul cultivator. As long as he doesn't pass away, his cultivation level is solid. Unfortunately, once Grandmaster Lingshu passes away, the number of nascent soul cultivators in our Xianqing school will be reduced to 5 again. Someone else interrupted. What's wrong with that? Several of our martial uncles are already in the late stage of the core formation realm. They'll soon be able to advance to the nascent soul realm, right? As he spoke, he counted with his fingers. Martial Uncle Danning of Drifting Cloud Peak, Martial Uncle Yuanin of Soul's Retreat Peak, Martial Uncle Shoujing of Clear Spring Peak, and Martial Uncle Lingxi of Sweet Dew Peak. These martial uncles are all in the late stage of the core formation realm. Haha. The old man raised his head and laughed. You guys, how long ago was this news? Let me tell you, Martial Uncle Danning and Martial Uncle Shoujing are already in the peak stage of the core formation realm. They'll be forming their nascent souls soon. Ah. Upon hearing what he said, several people in the same group looked towards the old man. Even Lan Ling, who disdained to talk to him, and Mo Tienga, who had been quietly listening, also cast their gazes on him. Cultivators forming their nascent souls was a major event for cultivation groups. Not to mention small and medium-sized cultivation groups. Even large cultivation groups like theirs would strengthen their vigilance and activate the Great Mountain Protecting Formation once a cultivator was ready to form his or her nascent soul. They would be in a half-sealed state to prevent people from causing trouble. Having so many people paying attention to him all of a sudden, the old man's gossipy heart was satisfied. You guys don't know, an impatient person urged. We've either been traveling outside for several years, or we're usually so busy that we don't even know. Senior Martial Brother Yen, quickly tell us. The old man was very proud of himself. Alright, I'll tell you. Based on our current situation at Xianqing School, Grandmaster Lingshu's lifespan is said to only have about 10 years left, so he's in a hurry to marry Martial Uncle Jiang to a young junior like Martial Uncle, by who has a backer and a bright future. That way, even if he passes away, he won't have to worry about Martial Uncle Jiang causing any trouble. Senior Martial Brother Yen, get to the point, someone urged impatiently. Although Martial Uncle Jiang's matter also sounded very interesting, it was nothing compared to someone forming their nascent soul in the school. Young people are really impatient. The old man glared at that person, then continued to speak, neither too fast nor too slow. A nascent soul cultivator passing away has a profound impact on the school, especially after Grandmaster Xianin formed his nascent soul, which greatly improved Xianqing School's strength. At this time, our Grandmasters naturally don't want to just watch Grandmaster Lingshu pass away. But how can they stop something like passing away? Longevity pills aren't that easy to obtain. This old man was really long-winded. Listening to him, Mo Tienga really wanted to grab his collar and shake him hard to shake off all his nonsense. She definitely wasn't the only one with this idea, but this old man wasn't threatened at all. In the end, they were from the same school, and they couldn't do such a thing. So she had no choice but to let him continue to be noisy. After a long time, he finally got to the actual content. Since that's the case, there's no other way. Grandmaster Lingshu can't hold on for more than a few years, so we can only let the core formation martial uncles, who have hopes of forming their nascent souls, speed up their cultivation. In addition to Martial Uncle Danning, Martial Uncle Shoujing, Martial Uncle Yuanin, and Martial Uncle Lingxi only advanced to the late stage in the last 50 years. This is all because of the support of nascent soul grandmasters. Then, he talked about several hundred words of nonsense before he got to the main point. It hasn't been long since Martial Uncle Yuanin and Martial Uncle Lingxi advanced to the late stage, and it'll be a while before they can form their nascent souls. Martial Uncle Danning stayed in the late stage for 100 years, and finally reached the peak stage of the core formation realm 2 years ago. As for Martial Uncle Shoujing, he just reached the peak stage of the core formation realm not long ago. Martial Uncle Shoujing had been in seclusion for 35 years. Ever since he returned from the demonic beast riot 35 years ago, he had been in seclusion. Martial Uncle Shoujing's talent really can't be underestimated. Among the few of us, I'm afraid there are some people with better spiritual roots than him. But we're still struggling in the foundation establishment realm. Not only has he formed his gold core, he's going to form his nascent soul very soon. Senior Brother Yen. Someone couldn't help but say, we all know about Martial Uncle Shoujing. There's no need to keep talking about it, right? The other 7 people all had the same expression, so Senior Martial Brother Yen could only shut his mouth. Fine. In any case, you know Martial Uncle Shoujing and Martial Uncle Danning are already in the peak stage of the core formation realm and can form their nascent souls. That's it. The 7 of them were speechless. Under the gazes of the 7 people, the old man surnamed Yen cried out in grievance. You wanted it to be concise, so that's it. After a moment of silence, someone else asked, can Martial Uncle Danning and Martial Uncle Shoujing successfully form their nascent souls? Who knows? Senior Martial Brother Yin quickly chimed in. Forming the nascent soul? It's not like building one's foundation. As long as one's aptitude isn't too bad, one can always take foundation building pills and eventually succeed. Forming one's nascent soul can only depend on the will of the heavens. It doesn't have much to do with aptitude. That was true. Building one's foundation was the first threshold of cultivation. Although most cultivators stayed in the aura refining realm their whole lives, for disciples of cultivation groups like them, as long as they were a bit serious and had a bit of luck, the possibility of them building their foundation was still quite high. But when it came to forming one's nascent soul, there were too many examples that proved the will of the heavens was unpredictable. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.